And let me get my notes. There we go. Okay, so what's your job title?
So I'm the Sexual Assault Prevention Education Coordinator on Western Michigan University's campus.
And what does that mean?
So I oversee our Fire Sexual Assault Peer Education Program and our Fireplace Resource and Support Center. FIRE standing for Fighting Ignorance and Rape Through Education. So our peer educators are folks that I train to go out and talk to their peers about sexual violence, about the sexual misconduct policy on our campus, about consent, and things kind of in all of those realms.
Mm-hmm.
And then our Fireplace Resource and Support Center is both a physical location and currently a virtual location that any WMU student, faculty, or staff can access if they are interested in learning more information, if they need help with resource finding, or if they even need help going through the Title IX reporting process.
Okay, what is Title IX?
Yeah, Title IX is a federal civil rights law that basically says any federally funded institution cannot allow gender or sex discrimination to happen on their campus or on their site. This mostly includes, or I shouldn't say mostly, but a lot of that includes federally funded institutions like universities and colleges. And so it basically says, hey, universities, you have an obligation to respond to sexual misconduct as it happens on your campus or in some cases near your campus.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Does that like extend to like when you say near your campus, that if it involves like both parties are from the campus?
So it gets a little complicated from there because there have been some changes over the last couple of years. Really, it changes with each new administration.
Sure.
We saw some big progression happen during the Obama era, and a lot of it was rescinded during the Trump era.
Oh.
And so, technically, right now, Title IX as the law doesn't cover all off-campus locations. However, some universities have taken upon themselves to reinstate that just in their sexual misconduct policy. So like Title IX says you have to have a sexual misconduct policy. Here's the things you have to have into it or have to add into it. And then universities get to decide from there on things if they want to add more to their policy or redefine some things a little bit, not a ton. So some colleges may not cover every off-campus situation, even if it involves two students, two faculty members, anybody affiliated with the university, whereas other colleges might based on their sexual misconduct policy and the process that they went in, or rather the procedures that they added into it.
So if a college sort of puts that like adds that policy, but it's not actually required by like the federal government, then basically they're just like beholden to themselves for not following their policy, right? There's no like real ramifications for them not following through on that.
Yeah, sort of. So I'm not super involved in the Title IX process like that far up,
Sure.
but kind of, yeah, in
Okay.
the sense that there would be less consequence for like federal financial assistance. Like the thing with Title IX is that all folks who are all institutions that are
Sure.
federally funded through that have to stay in compliance. And so if there are things that are not met via Title IX as a policy, then institutions can definitely face certain consequences.
Sure.
But if it's just stuff that has been added to the sexual misconduct policy, there are university mechanisms for navigating that, but it is not connected to law, if that makes sense.
Sure. So yeah, I guess what I know I don't want to get super heavy into the law because we talked before and you said that you didn't know a whole lot about that. But I guess I was just
Yeah.
curious, like if a university had a policy that wasn't required by like let's say like the Trump administration's one, so they just decided to keep all the Obama administration policy for Title IX, but it wasn't required by law. Did they sort of enter a contract with the students to where like if that policy is violated, that student has like some sort of legal right to like sue the university because they didn't follow their own policy?
Sort of. And that's actually been one of the biggest areas of tension maybe or confusion. Some nerves and anxiety live there of what can and can't be enforced upon students. So like for example, we have like student code of conduct, right? None of that, or very little of that is connected to the law, but
Sure.
students are still expected to follow the conduct policy. It's very similar to the sexual misconduct policy, except for it has to do with sexual and intimate relations and all that kind of stuff. Um, the difference is what can be protected under law versus what can't be protected under law.
Sure.
And students, there is a potential for students to sue based on that. So that's also something that kind of gets wrapped up into it and is a large source of anxiety. I think for a lot of administration at universities is like, what do we add and what do we not add? What do we keep and what do we not keep? Things like that.
I got you, because it seems to like me at a personal level. If I was in a university, and I'm held accountable to the policies they set for me, I would expect them to be held accountable to me. It seems like we're entering a contract. I'm paying for the service. This policy seems to be a part of the service. It seems like that me paying should entitle me to some sort of legal recourse if they violate the policy that we agreed upon purchase of the service. Like
Right.
like pretty much anything else. Like if I agree to give somebody my car and like by law they're allowed to hold it because it's unsafe or something, but it says that they can't do that in their own policy, seems like I should be able to sue them for that, like damages or anything
Yeah.
like that from me not having my car. It just seems to me like it would be the case. Not that I'm trying to compare people to vehicles or anything like that. It just seems to be like an applicable like service contract agreement metaphor.
Yeah, yeah, I would argue that it's pretty similar in that way, and again, is kind of an area of anxiety, not in the sense of just like universities not even following their own procedures, but just like what procedures can they actually enforce that
Sure.
don't have that legal backing, and then yeah, if they also don't follow the actual legal procedures, then not only is there potential to be sued by a student, a family, a group of people, but also to receive a 10%, I think I might want to double check on that, but a 10% cut in financial assistance to the university. So
So
yeah.
then, leading off of that, like how much responsibility do you think the university has to keep its students safe? Because like realistically, there's no possible way that they can be like ideally responsible for everything that a student or a teacher does because like they don't know. You could take
Right.
every precaution necessary. You could have like immense background checks, like 6-tiered interviews, and still have a teacher like rape a student, and like they could be like, hey, we did everything we could. So like, at what point do you think that the burden shifts off of the individual to the institution? This I'm asking you personally.
Yeah, personally, not affiliated with WMU. I all opinions are my own, right? Like that kind of stuff. But personally, I think when it comes to employees, there is a much greater responsibility than over students because you're actually like paying those folks. To what level, it's really hard to say because of that exactly what you bring up, and because policy can only go so far. And so
Sure.
what I mean with that is, yes, we have definitions for sexual harassment. We have definitions for non-consensual sexual contact, things like that, which are really useful. We also have vaguer definitions for things like harm to others, right? Which sounds very vague, and it is very vague, so that we can kind of have this catch-all term to be able to support as many people as we can through this policy, right? At
Sure.
the same time, that doesn't always work. Some
Sure.
things still fall through the policy. And so those things are the harder things to hold universities accountable to because they're more cultural or social issues than they are like the responsibility of the university. So what I mean specifically is talking about instances of sexual coercion. Sometimes that can fit really neatly into our sexual misconduct policy where we say, yes, this falls under sexual assault. Here's how, here's why. This perpetrator knew what they were doing was harm, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Other situations when it's I've been in this relationship for 5 years and I've said okay to having sex, but I didn't actually want to a majority of the time, the policy can't really catch all of that because it's too vague for the policy.
Sure.
And it's hard to, there's also, in trying to stay not biased, although you could argue that no matter what, it's always going to be biased,
Sure.
there has to be this sort of point of the perpetrator either knew or should have known that it was harm.
Sure.
That they, yeah. So,
I I think we're
getting
talking
back to
about.
your question
Oh, sure.
with
Sure. Go ahead.
responsibility, sorry, I realized I kind of went off a
No, no,
tangent.
you're good.
I think it's pretty hard to kind of pin the spot of where the university has responsibility and where it doesn't. Um, Again, I think going back to, because a lot of this is social issues, not just the university in and of itself.
Sure. So then I have two things. The first one I'm going to ask just because you brought it up. What
Sure.
you're describing is like the difference between, you said, like I said okay, but I wasn't really into it. The difference between consent and enthusiastic consent, right? That's really what you're
Hmm.
getting at there.
Sort of. So I'm getting, in a way, yes, but I'm also thinking about trauma responses that people have. So oftentimes we're only taught about fight or flight. And now some people know a little bit more about freeze, but very few people understand the idea of fawn, which is also one of these responses, but less talked about and given less validation. And so fawn is this idea of people pleasing, the idea that we are going to breach every single boundary of our own in order to ensure that this other person feels safe, feels comfortable, feels like they can do whatever they want to. And so in those moments, even when a person says yes, it's not always that what you mentioned, that enthusiastic yes, right? It wasn't that they actually wanted to, they just wanted to avoid the blowout of this other person being mad
Sure.
that they didn't say yes to having sex. And
Sure.
so that's more what I mean. It's really a coercive path, whether the other person recognizes that they're doing the coercion or not, because sometimes that coercion can come straight from that other partner or partners, or other times it is a learned adaptation that a person developed in a different relationship or in a different setting that's now being applied into this one as well.
Sure.
So it's just hard, right? Like that's hard to fit into a policy.
I mean, so when you say too, like, it's a learned behavior, it's entirely possible that like this coercion could happen, like literally at no fault of the other person. There's just like a misunderstanding there, correct? Especially since like they've literally never said no. Like I had no idea. Like that has to be a common thing, right? If somebody is exhibiting like what you said, fawn trait.
Yeah, sometimes. I don't want to say all the time because I do think, or
Well,
even a
I wouldn't
majority of the
say.
time,
I'm just saying it
yeah.
can't be super uncommon, right?
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think it's super uncommon because frankly we live in a really sex negative culture that doesn't teach us how to engage in sex in positive, safe and healthy ways.
Sure.
So people tend to bring in these learned behaviors or learned adaptations, or particular with fawn, not only is it partially learned, but it's also partially just part of being human. Because really the reason that
Sure.
we have this fawn response is because humans and mammals really are social creatures, right? So when our social bonds become threatened in any way, it's like an automatic response, just as automatic as fight, flight, or freeze.
Sure.
So part of it is learned, but part of it is also just like, I'm going for it. I need my social bond to be protected.
Sure.
Um, and so, yes, sometimes coercion or situations can happen without a person consciously thinking, yes, I'm going to coerce this person. I'm going to make them feel bad. I'm going to make them do what they want. Because, uh, sorry, I'm getting a little
No, no, no,
rambly
no.
here,
You
but
ramble
I think
away. I'm just
there's
taking
also this.
notes of what I want to say while you're rambling. Go ahead.
Perfect. Love it. There's also the learned behavior of suppressing our boundaries, right? So sometimes a person, maybe just for simplicity's sake, not acknowledging non-poly, relationships,
Sure,
or
sure.
not acknowledging, yeah, all that jazz. If two people are in a relationship and one person says, hey, I want to have sex, and they're just asking because they're like, I just want to be intimate with you,
Yeah.
the other person may automatically say yes, not because this other person made them feel like they had to, but other situations that they've been in, they have been made to feel like they had to say yes.
Sure.
And so it may not be on this person over here. The situation still occurs, there's still potentially harm there,
Sure.
but it's not like one person is to blame. It's more, needing to have a conversation about boundaries, and
Sure.
and every party involved needing to be willing to be honest, even if that's hard, with maybe some trauma, maybe some triggers. Um, and for just like having a better social environment when it comes to sex, intimacy, and romantic things.
Sure. And I could probably give like a full on lecture about boundaries, what are healthy and what are not healthy boundaries for your partners. Because it seems like we really, really glorify unhealthy boundaries for our partners and really, really stigmatize hard, like healthy boundaries. It's probably the most backward social system I've seen outside of like just like genuine bigotry. like
Mm-hmm.
we like in and like in its various forms. It's crazy because like I know so many people that normalize like you can't talk to people that are the opposite sex as you. Like that's insane. That's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely insane to me.
Mm-hmm.
Even down to like even outside of like romantic relationships too. Like guys can't hug their friends and things like that. Just like a bunch of things, like interpersonal relationships are probably like the most unhealthy thing that I could, if like when I think of like unhealthy social structures, that's probably the first thing that pops into my head. So when I think about the other things like bigotry, I just think evil. I don't think these things are evil. I just think that they're like crazy unhealthy because
Mm-hmm.
there's not really a negative intent involved. It's just usually like this like really large like societally imposed uh like stigma that just sort of like makes you feel like this is how you're supposed to behave.
Right.
I read a thing today that basically said it was like a meme of something that like clearly never happened. Some chick said that her dad like tipped her on her OnlyFans and she was super proud. Like that's how you should support your kid or whatever. Obviously, it's a fake meme. Like I don't believe none of that shit. That's just shit that people put on Facebook to get shit. But then somebody said if somebody's dad saw their OnlyFans, they would beat their husband, fiance, boyfriend's ass for letting that. And I was just like, this is crazy. Like,
Whoa.
like first of all, you have to know this is fake, so chill. Second of all, like, why did you come here in the comments to be like crazy misogynistic for like no reason? Like these, like aside from the fact that like that didn't happen, like they weren't even mad at the woman. Like obviously the behavior that they didn't like, which is okay, was her doing the thing. But for somehow the onus was on her heterosexual partner that was assumed to like be like the arbiter of what she should and shouldn't be doing, which to me
Right.
was
It's
like
all
a
about
great
control.
example. Yeah, it was a great example of like how we think about boundaries. Like the boundaries isn't even on her to set for herself, it was on her partner to set for her, as though like
Mm-hmm.
and that too, like I was reading that today, I was just like, this is like a glorious example of like how poor boundaries are like even thought of being structured before they're even approached.
Mm-hmm. And how steep in heterosis normative
Yeah,
expectations they are, right? Like that is specifically for heterosexual cisgender couples, right? Or at least what we would
I don't know.
assume.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not like in a homosexual relationship. I'm sure that I take that back. I definitely know some people that are in homosexual relationships that have like really weird boundaries,
No, for sure, but I'm
but
talking
it's
about
more
that
common.
specific example. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And I think even in um, queer or gay relationships, that those heterosis ideas can still infiltrate and still be present, right? Like there used to be, and maybe there still is. I don't know. I'm in pretty queer friendly circles all the time now, so I'm not really sure anymore.
Sure.
But the whole idea of like who's the man and who's the woman in a relationship that doesn't just have men, women, or maybe doesn't even include men or women at all. So thinking about that, like it's just steeped in it, right? Like these rigid ideas of what relationships should look like, who should be involved in them, and who has the power and control in it too, which
Sure.
relates
Which
right
is
back
what the man and
to
woman
sexual violence.
represents in that, right?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes,
It's like
I think
who's the dominant
socially,
one and
yeah.
who's the submissive one is what they're really asking. But instead, they use
Right.
the label man and woman for that,
Exactly, yeah.
which is super unfortunate for like submissive cis men too.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess, and it didn't even occur to me about that until we just started now talking about that. Um,
Right.
so let's see here. The other thing, another thing that I wanted to talk about when we were talking about like the lack of enthusiastic consent with like somebody who's I don't know how to put this, like exhibiting fawn trait. Is that a good way to put that?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, is that I would assume that there would be less onus on the person accepting somebody who's acting fawn because we're not really wired to look for problems when we get an affirmative to something we're looking for. Like you'd have
Right.
to be
And
really proactive to like notice like things like that. Like if you say like, hey, like like I can be kind of lazy and sometimes I won't catch till afterwards. I'm trying to be really proactive to not ask Morgan to do shit for me. Like if I'm in the middle of a game or something, like hey lady, can you grab me this? And then it's stuff's like, oh, shit, no, never mind, I'll get it because I'm just lazy and I've noticed. So I'm trying to like be less lazy at putting like shit onto her because like it's not right. But I have
right.
habits and I get distracted and so it just happens. But it got really bad because like she always said, yeah, she's enabled me super bad, which isn't her fault. But it was harder for me to identify it as a problem because like
Right.
I'm not seeing a problem. I asked for a thing and then she did the thing. Like it's just like that's not how we're wired to identify things. We're identified to identify problems that hurt us, that do something to us that we don't like. But like when you're
Right.
doing that's why we talk a lot about enabling behavior when somebody has like addictions and things like that. We don't see ourselves doing a problem because like, or we don't see a problem because like we're always getting what we want.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's got to be really hard to like try to address to somebody that like, hey, you might be doing something wrong because they're gonna genuinely feel like I didn't do anything wrong. Like they're like, I
Yeah.
did the
Yeah.
consent thing and like everything was good. Like how could I have done anything wrong?
Right. And it's so hard because I think it's sometimes a person might just say yes and not have any sort of physical social cue that they don't actually mean that yes, right? So those are, I
Yeah.
think, the hardest situations. But then it's even harder, especially um if we don't have the language of like social and body behavior. So it's one thing for somebody to say like, yeah, like I'll go do that for you, right? Like I'm saying
Sure.
yes, I sound pretty happy about it. It's another thing for a person to say like, yeah, sure, I'll go get that.
Yeah.
But that's specifically based on me and my body language, right? Somebody else may talk in that second way where they say, yeah, sure.
Hmm.
And that's them actually saying yes in a rather enthusiastic, genuinely consensual way. So I think that's also where some toughness comes in, is that we have to be really attuned to our partners and
Hmm.
their, ways of interacting. And sometimes we're just not there with people, or sometimes we just like don't do language in that way, and
Hmm.
that isn't necessarily on one single person's fault. I would argue
Sure.
that it's more on the social fault, that we are not taught, nor do we teach how to feel comfortable asserting boundaries, and
Sure.
how to take other people's assertion of their boundaries too. But then there's other situations where a person doesn't say anything at all, and the person says, "Well, I have consent," right? And those are completely different than what we're talking about, but still can be lumped into this kind of like coercive,
Yeah.
fawn style of things.
And actually, you mentioned that's a lot how so like when it comes to me trying to correct my behavior, one of the boundaries that I set is like, please, if you don't want to, like I'm not, like I'm usually if I ask for something, I'm not looking at you. Usually I'm doing a thing. That's why I'm being lazy because I don't want to stop doing the thing.
Right.
Please communicate with me how you really feel. Not only that too, um, I overanalyze everything, so like I can take anything that your body is doing as like body language, and since I have like depression and anxiety, I take almost everything as a negative. So I,
Right.
I try to set when I'm talking to people that I'm around a lot in general, I try to say please just be really upfront with me. Like I'm really literal in my language, so sometimes it's really hard for me to assess when somebody's not being.
Right.
So I make it up front and I say, please, like, it makes me uncomfortable to know that like if I like convinced you to do something that you didn't want to do. And one of the things that made me really a lot more aware about I guess like the idea of like not just being more aware of like how much deeper and like not like surface level consent can go is one time Morgan and I went on a date with somebody, and then afterwards she told me like, hey, I didn't really want to go on a date with that person and it shook me. And I was like, wait, then why did you say that? Like, because I was like, I felt extremely uncomfortable. Because like I would have never tried to, well, she said just because you wanted to, but like I didn't have any idea. And we ended up being really good friends with that person. We never went on another date with them. We're planning to go and visit them in Florida if COVID's like fucking chills. Um,
Yeah.
Even though we're both vaccinated, like it's got to chill a little. They're like
For
one of my
sure.
favorite people in the whole world now. But I was at that point. I said, "Hey, look, this can't ever happen again. Otherwise, I don't think that like we can like date as a triad ever again. Because like I'm super scared of like you violating a personal boundary because you think that it's something I want. I don't want that ever. And like
Mm,
if it happens again, like I won't be able to trust that it's not going to continuously happen. So like, please just be
sure.
upfront with me. Like I would, it's like the scariest thing ever to me.
Hmm.
like whether it's dating with somebody with her or without her too. Like if I'm with somebody new, like I will ask to hold your hand. I will ask before I hug you, even if it's a friend. I'll ask the first time, at least the first time. Like I do a lot of like threshold consent. If
Mm-hmm.
it's not like if it's not like overtly sexual, or like hasn't been like regularly sexual, I do a lot of like threshold consent, at least the very first time. I mean, if the threshold seemed a little awkward, like if I said like, hey, can I have a hug, and I felt like they maybe didn't want the hug after, like during the hug, I'll be like, I'll kind of check like, hey, was that okay, and I'll probably still check the next time. And if they
Mm-hmm.
think that I'm being weird, I'll just explain like, well, I don't know, I got weird vibes or whatever.
Right.
And I don't know. I feel like that's probably like my best method because like I probably not great to ask somebody for like if I'm allowed to hug them every single time. They probably just start thinking that I'm weird. Like you've hugged me like 50 times. You can stop. You can chill. So I kind of go on this like threshold basis,
Right.
and it seems like I haven't had any like negative responses to it or anything like that. And that definitely makes me feel a lot more comfortable too. Um, what do you think about like a threshold consent kind of deal?
Yeah, honestly, I think that's perfect because I think usually what happens when I'm in presentations, because that's a big part of what I do is deliver this information to other
Mhm.
students, other folks. And so when we get to that consent part, I think a lot of times people think like, oh, I have to draw up a contract every time, or I have to ask every single time for every single interaction. And it's not quite like that, right? So I usually say something like, we don't have to drop a contract that says like initial here for neck kisses, sign here for butt touches. Doesn't have to go that deep, but it should be just a nice check-in process, right? Where we're just making sure that everything's still going well. Whether that's we check in a whole bunch throughout one night and then do smaller check-ins in the future, or whether that's checking in just a few times but making it really known that we're really considering the other person here or other people that are in this situation, that we want to make sure everybody's actually enjoying it and that our only mission is not just to have an orgasm, right, if we're talking about sexual
Sure.
specific experiences. So I think that's perfect because that's I think what feels best usually is to just say like, hey, here's what I'm feeling, here's my boundaries, here's me checking in with you that this behavior is okay.
Sure.
And once it becomes a normalized part of that relationship, whether that's friendship, familial relationship, sexual or romantic relationships, once it becomes normalized, then we can just do small check-ins over time, right? It doesn't have to be big grand gestures every single time that we go, especially when it's a behavior that's uh um pretty typical for that relationship.
Sure. Yeah. Um, so, what do you think is? I mean, obviously, you think that I would assume, based on your job, that you would think that like people not having this information is probably like the biggest barrier to like preventing these problems. Aside from
Yeah.
the information, what do you think is like the second biggest? Do you think it's like people not believing the information? Do you think that it's people not caring about the information? Do you think that it's people being afraid to enact the stuff that you teach, or do you think that like what do you think about that?
Yes to everything that you said, I think.
What do you think's the biggest factor? Like
But
if you could fix one of those things, like if you had a magic wand and you could
gosh.
wave and fix one of those issues, what do you think would be the biggest one to lead towards less people feeling, I guess like bad in an interaction where consent could have made it not bad?
Right. Honestly, I think it's and I don't think I'm going to say this quite right. I'm workshopping it as it's coming out.
Sure, sure. You're not on the spot or
But
anything.
well, I don't know, it's live. I can't like
I mean,
delete
if
what I'm saying.
I mean if you want to think about it and come back a little bit later, I can take a note and ask you again.
No, I know what I want to say. It's just I don't know that I'm going to verbalize it as much as in the way that I want to, but I'm just going to go
Sure,
for it.
sure.
Um, I would love to eradicate the ideas of what we should and should not do. Because I think that folks, when they are in our presentations, sometimes it's people who honestly don't need the information, right? They attended because they're already interested in the topic, which means that they probably have already done the work to the level that our presentations go to, right? It's only a 50-minute presentation. We can only cover so much, yada, yada, yada. But sometimes we're in presentations that are just like first year students they didn't ask for us to be there. We're just part of their curriculum, and we come in and we talk about this. And I love those moments because I think when we can make that connection, when we can actually see people go like, oh yeah, like that makes sense, or I should also do that. It's then the hard part of implementing it is that these folks feel like the social norms maybe don't line up entirely with some of the things that we say, like that we should be asking for consent every single time, regardless of really what that looks like. But with new partners, you should be asking for consent. You should be going based off of body language or your assumptions on signs, right, or what somebody was wearing or anything like that. It should be an actual conversation. Doesn't have to be a long one, but it should be an actual conversation. And I think that's where people find it hard to actually implement the behaviors, because that's not what is typically expected of sexual relationships, I think, particularly in college settings. So I would love to eradicate that, maybe the social norms of it or the gender norms of it, the rigid ideas of what these things should do, because folks, they learn. I know that they learn. I assess our learning outcomes every single
Sure.
month, basically. So I know that they're learning this information. It's just hard to implement it when you don't really see that maybe in your day-to-day life. If you're already in a friend group or a social group that does implement those things, it's much easier to do that. But
Sure.
if you're in a group that doesn't, 10 times harder.
So you think that it's
So
falling under the fear category, fear of using it?
I think so, yeah. Just like the fear of the fear of the unknown in a way, right? Like, how is this person
Hmm.
going to respond to me? Do they think I'm going to be silly for asking this question? Will I ruin the mood, right? That's such a big one that we get all the time, is how do you ask for consent without ruining the mood? And it's like, one, there's many ways, I think.
Sure.
And two, wouldn't you rather ruin the mood than potentially harm somebody or be harmed yourself? Like, there's just it's really tough there. But I think it goes back to fawning in a way of, we are so fearful of our social bonds being threatened. So maybe that's really a big part of it. But I also agree with what you mentioned about the not caring. Not that I don't think that people don't care. Well, some people don't. But I think that there's a lot of times an assumption that we don't need to know this information, that we already know enough, or that it's not applicable based on certain identity categories. But it's blatantly not true. Everyone should know this information in some way or another and find it applicable for their own lives. I'm not saying that every single thing that I'm going to say is going to fit directly into somebody's life, but they can take components of it and mix it into how they do life, I guess, how they do relationships. But yeah, then it goes back to the fear thing. So I think the caring and the fear thing are both really important.
Okay. So I mean that's probably where I was at. Now, I have a couple questions, and I do actually want to put that. Let me just take a note real quick so I don't forget, because I'm ADHD as heck and I forget a lot, especially in a conversation. Shit, did I already forget? Oh yeah, I didn't forget.
Nice.
Okay, so do you do Q&As during your presentations afterwards?
Not right now. Not like formally, because we just have our presentation. Frankly, I jam-packed it too much this semester,
Sure.
and we're already past how much we should do. But we do like sort of informal Q&A. So I'll stick back after presentations, or my students will stick back after presentations, and just kind of hang out if they have questions. But we also encourage folks to ask questions during the presentation. If something's not
Okay.
jiving, if we are saying one thing and they've heard another, like, we want to make sure that we're all either on the same page or similar pages together.
Sure. So what's like the most common questions you get, or like what's the most important questions that you get?
Yeah, I think the most common question I get is, what if two people are drunk and they hook up?
Sure.
What does consent mean in there? And I usually just say, and this is more of a personal opinion, it's really hard when you mix any sort of drug into any situation, really, but particularly sexual situations, because I think that we can become really, they have physical and or rather, shoot, what's the word that I'm trying to think of?
Cognitive?
Physiological
Oh, okay.
impact, right? Like, it impacts how our bodies are literally moving, sometimes in different ways, depending on the drug, whether it's other alcohol or something else. And it can also just really make it hard to communicate with other people. It
Sure.
makes it hard for us to say what we are needing, what we are wanting, and it makes it hard for us to understand what other people are trying to tell us. So I usually just say, if folks are, if everybody in the situation is using some sort of substance, I really don't think that sexual situations should be occurring at that time. Now, if it's a relationship where there's been some really good assertive boundaries made there, we've had, multiple conversations on it, we understand our limitations when it comes to substance intake, I think that's a bit different than two random people who have never met each other, who are both under, or even acquaintances who are under some sort of substance thing. I think those are different situations.
Sure.
But anyway, I generally say that neither person probably could have consented. I don't actually know based on the situation, but that's my gut instinct, is to say that it just shouldn't have happened altogether, and that we need to be really considerate of who is initiating contact, right? So if somebody is, has been drinking throughout the night, maybe they're buzzed, maybe they're drunk, maybe they're borderline incapacitated, right? They may be trying to force themselves onto another person. If that person is not wanting that, but then has to follow through because that person is so forceful, the other person, even though they were also under some sort of influence,
Sure.
they didn't want that. They made it probably maybe not really clear because, drugs and all that stuff, or alcohol and all that other stuff. But that person is the one really initiating that contact.
Sure.
If both people are initiating contact, then at that point it becomes pretty difficult, right? Like, there's not really a blame here. And I don't really think that we need to look at situations in terms of blame, but rather just that was a pretty tough thing that happened. And how are we doing now? Like, what maybe do we need to heal from? Do we feel like we need to heal at all? Because sometimes people engage in those situations and they're
They're
just like,
fine.
yep, I'm still living my life. And that's okay too. It doesn't, just because drugs or alcohol were involved in sexual situation doesn't automatically make it trauma. It just makes it much riskier, I think.
Sure. So, two things. One would be I'm less interested in blame, but I do think there's something to say about like moral culpability.
Sure.
So like usually if something was bad, it seems like you're more often than not going to find that one party had more moral culpability than another, which to me seems a bit different than blame. But then also, I just want to push back on the substance one because you say like it shouldn't have happened, but it does happen like a lot.
Mhm. Mhm.
Especially like when it's strangers, I would say that it's almost like extremely common.
Mhm.
Because like usually strangers don't hook up completely sober. 'Cause usually it's not they're not a stranger at that point. You've met already. At least I would guess. So let's say I'm gonna try to give you the situation and make it as even ended as possible and try to eliminate power dynamics and stuff as much as I possibly can. Let's say two guys, both 23 years old, both had like 6 beers, equal alcohol tolerance. Um, I would say that like as far as making moves go, maybe one person just advanced past them kissing and then it led into a sexual situation. Like, do you think that like they're both like morally culpable at this point, or one person is potentially morally culpable if only one person felt like something went bad there?
I, I don't think I have a clean answer, frankly.
Sure.
Again, it's another situation that I would just say shouldn't have been drinking. Probably not the best time to engage in a sexual situation or whatever other substance, right? But I agree, it still happens. Right? It's still going to happen regardless of the fact that I don't like it.
Sure,
Um,
sure, sure.
so
Do you think there's
it's
moral
tough.
culpability on both of them for engaging to begin with when they were intoxicated? Which
Uh,
almost feels like an offhanded way to victim blame, I guess. But like, I'm not really.
right,
That's definitely not the goal here.
right. Yeah, it's
Oops.
more just, I guess, in a way, right? Like, I'm not saying that anybody is to be blamed, especially if somebody is feeling really uncomfortable afterwards, right? Like, I wouldn't say that it's really anybody's fault if there was no, big, removing all of these power dynamics that we're
Sure.
talking about, right? So I wouldn't really put blame on a single person, but rather acknowledge that that was just a really tough situation,
Okay.
for everybody involved in it. And that unfortunately, it's a really big gray area. There's not one single right answer, especially if one person is kind of waking up and maybe they're like, all right, like it happened and that's it. And the other person's thinking, like, whoa, I really did not want that to happen at all. If neither person knew that or could communicate that well, right? Like, then it's not just about like one single blame. It's more about, okay, what do we do from here to make sure that we're feeling safer in the future, to make sure that we're healing from this situation if we feel like we need to heal, um, to make sure that we are engaging in situations that make us actually feel comfortable, right? So, yeah, it's tough. I don't think that there's just a single right answer for that.
Okay. Um, and then also too, you said that you don't think that anybody would be in a position where they would want to risk like as far as like you said that somebody like wouldn't you rather risk it asking somebody for consent when you're doing something even though you assume that you have it rather than risk them feeling bad. I think that hey, thanks for subbing, buddy. Sorry. um, I appreciate it. Um, I definitely think that there's some people out there, especially like I could definitely imagine some guys who are like in college and they're virgins and they think that like this is literally their only chance and that like if they fucked up and asked, especially like it's like some perception of some guys who are in this position, especially if they're maybe with a woman who's exhibiting like a lot of like more aggressive sexual traits and stuff. They might be like, man, I'm really sure, like, I'm pretty damn sure, and I really think she's gonna negatively respond to me checking, like if she's being like really dominant. So like, I feel like in that situation, you might find some guys who are like, there's no way I'm gonna risk asking at this point.
Right.
And she might not even be as dominant too, as just they're perceiving it because they've never even had the experience.
Hmm.
So I could absolutely see that being the case. Um,
Oh, no doubt. Like, yeah, that definitely happens. I think even in other situations, I think that happens rather
I was
frequently.
just trying to craft the
Eh,
perfect scenario for the argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and even to not have a perfect scenario, I think that's usually just what happens, where folks are like, well, I don't want to ruin the mood, or I really assume that I have consent here. And maybe folks do, right? Like, there's no saying that
Oh shoot.
that person is not okay with if we don't ask the question. Eh, and I think it goes back to social bonds. Maybe not necessarily fun as a response, but really the nervousness of I don't want to ruin this social bond or the bond for the moment, right? But I think then that goes back to what folks are perceiving um as sort of the purpose of the interaction. Some people are thinking this interaction is to have an orgasm. That's my goal. I'm going to win and that's it. That's my only mission, right? And so if we already have that in mind, we're not even going to necessarily think about asking for consent because that's a deterrence for our goal, right? Like,
Sure.
or could be. It maybe isn't, but it could be a deterrence of me achieving that orgasm, right?
Sure.
Other people are like, it doesn't matter if I get an orgasm. I just want to have a nice intimate moment with this person, right?
Sure.
If I have an orgasm, wonderful. If I don't have an orgasm, hee hee, that's life. And here we are. um, so I think that folks need to really be, and it's hard because we're talking about like 18-year-olds
Sure.
sometimes 16-year-olds, sometimes younger than that. But I think that there needs to be attention paid to what we deem as the purpose, or the point of that interaction. You know, is it to continue to have interactions in the future? Is it to only have this one interaction and I just have this goal in mind? Is the goal really that useful for having a human connection? You know, it's
Sure.
yeah, I'm getting rambly, but there's that.
No. You're totally good. Ramble all you want. That's what you're here for. Um, so one of the arguments that I've heard, as far as like reducing things like sexual assault based on like perceived consent, and I don't personally think that it's very controversial, but I can see how it would be. But I think that we would probably see at least a significant decrease in this sort of assault happening if it was less stigmatized for women to make the first move. It's almost always put on the guy to make the first move, and there's an amount of pressure involved there that can lead to the fear that we've talked about, that can lead to just the assumption that you have the consent because, like, it's my job to determine it, you know? That's something that could absolutely happen. Okay, somebody's getting banned from chat.
Yonkers.
Sorry, give me a minute.
Yeah.
It looks like I found the first incel to pop up here.
Oh boy.
Yeah. How do I do this? I've never had anybody this shit. I guess that should work, huh? Followers only chat. Okay. Can I remove this? Okay, he's timed out. There we go. Okay.
Solid.
Okay. So go ahead. Sorry. Continue.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It's not necessarily something that it's like brought up a ton in our presentations or in conversations that I have, but I can see what you're getting at, that it would be frankly really wonderful if we could just sort of play on neutral ground, which is
Yeah.
much easier said than done because of
I feel like that's overly
everything.
idealized. But I feel like the
Exactly.
more that we push towards that, like I feel like so like this approach is definitely like based on like pragmatism. Like I feel like it like this isn't like whether what's right or wrong, but I think it's really pragmatic that if we pushed in that direction, we would see a decline in like sexual assault based strictly around like consent. And maybe even sexual assault in general, just because like I don't know how far you can separate like the sexual assault from like a misunderstanding of consent, because probably to some degree a lot of assaulters at least convince themselves that they had it, even if it's like outlandish to consider that they did. But also too like that societal pressure. Even like I would even say like even like taking it down from society, even like small group pressure to be the one to push for it, has to have some sort of like mental taxing to the point of like making bad decisions too. If it's always on you, especially like if you're not the kind of person that's an assertive or aggressive person in general. It's the kind of thing that can get built up to you really, really big, to where you eventually just like sporadically make a move because like you have no fucking idea what you're doing. You're not an aggressive person. So I just think that like this is completely leaving morality out of it. I just think like pragmatically, it would have to make some kind of significant change to like the kind of stuff we're seeing. I know you subbed. I said
Sure.
thank you. I appreciate it.
Um, I think I can agree to most of what you're saying, but I would honestly broaden it to just more of having.
And I guess I want to just justify to you. I'm using heteronormative claims because this is where the majority of the stuff is happening.
Sure.
The
Yeah.
majority of like the worst people that we think about are cis men doing this. Like, let's be honest. I know it happens in every facet, but like, if if we can consider this to be like a huge problem, if we got rid of them, like we probably wouldn't be having this discussion at all right now. You probably wouldn't have a job, right?
Maybe,
Let's
but also I think it's not necessarily even just cis men as sort of this category, but rather the socialization of cis men and of
sure. I guess I
you
meant
know
as the
in
perpetrators being cis men.
right certainly, and in that I still think that we need to look at the socialization of it, because it's not this inherent trait in every single cis man on the planet. In fact, we know that
Okay.
Need to have a different understanding of
Okay.
relationships, how they start out. Oh,
I'm sorry. Everything cut out for like a solid 45 seconds there. I didn't know if my webcam did too. I was like this. We lost sound and my keyboard cut off and everything. One of my peripherals is a piece of shit and it likes to cut out like all my peripherals every once in a while. And I haven't spent an hour like disconnecting them all and waiting for it to happen to figure out which one it is. I'm so sorry.
it's okay. That's so funny though.
I was like, oh shit, oh no. Sometimes it happens during a game too, and I'm just like, I'm gonna die now. Okay.
I'm just gonna die now. Great.
I'm so sorry too, because like, I don't know, I missed a lot of good stuff.
That's okay.
I could still see the energy, but I couldn't hear it.
I could still see the energy.
I could.
Well, I'm glad that you could at least see it there for a second. So is everything good now?
Yep, we're
or-
good. We're
Okay.
good as heck now.
Solid. Anyway, all I was saying is that I think at the root of it is a socialization process and our expectations around gender and around relationship dynamics. I think it's a great idea to get more women engaged in the start of the relationship or the process, right? We have Bumble for that reason, right? Like that's part of
Sure.
why that was created. But I also think that we sort of need to go higher than that, all the way up to, what are we expecting of different people based on their identities? What do relationships have to look like, or like socially have to look like? How do they
Sure.
start out and all that? So that's more of where I think I would start, which is again much easier said than done.
Sure. Yeah. Oh shit, hang on a minute. Am I still streaming? Oh, Discord just took over my camera. One sec. You know, I guess that doesn't matter either. As long as we're still on stream. Are we? I think I can just switch it to us both here. Nope, heck, I gotta turn off this camera. Reinitiate my camera. Sorry, I'm the worst here.
No, you're so good.
Let's see. That fix it? Okay, cool. We're all good again. Oh shit, I need to open that. I need to open Discord so I can see you. And also, yeah, is it weird that you can't see me? I can't use Discord camera because my stream is taking up my camera. I blame John too.
Because you randomly popped in, and I was like, "Oh, like I don't know what this means." Like you're like human. And I was like, "I'll just keep talking until I'm told to not talk anymore."
If you like want like some sort of like eye contact or whatever, you can do the Twitch link and you can see me talking to you.
I know, that's what I was just checking to make sure that it was still.
But mute it.
Yes, to make sure that it was still live.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, whoa. Now I can see. I'm like watching myself react, but like a little bit slower, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Don't look at. Yeah. Maybe that's just not good for you. Then I say it's not good to look at
No,
yourself.
I can't do it.
When you talk, because it really throws you off. Or like if you can hear yourself slightly delayed. Oh my gosh! Like my brain just starts shorting out everywhere. All I hear is like 50 decibels of internet dial-up sound.
Literally, when Alex and I were trying to figure out some of the stuff before you and I tested it last night, he was like, "Oh, you just have to do this, and like you can test your sound." And I was like, "Oh, perfect." And I thought it was gonna be the same way that like other programs test sound, where it does like a little recording and then you can hear it back.
It's
But
live.
on Discord, it's live, and so I was like, like after I was talking, I was like, "Oh no."
Yeah, it really messes up your brain.
Yep, it did. I was scrambled.
So just to recap, because I kind of got lost in like the technical difficulties. What was your response about the pragmatism of like moving towards women making a first move in hetero non-normative situations?
Yeah. I personally just think that it needs to go even broader than that. I really think that we need to be more critical of the way that we socialize into these gender categories and what we deem as the expectations of these gender roles and things like that. And we also need to reframe, or maybe not need to, but a potential solution, or solution isn't quite the word, but a potential thing that we could do is reframe what we understand as our expectations for relationships.
Sure.
Um, that, like, who's doing what when. I don't know if that matters as much as everybody in the situation being able to feel like it's a mutual exchange and feel like boundaries are being asserted and respected and allowed to change too, through
Hmm.
conversation. So I agree. I think that that could be one grand way of, like, having more women feel more comfortable, feel safer to, start things, to be the flirtatious one, to maybe be the, person who pursues the relationship. But I also think that we just have to, frankly, fundamentally change the way that we look at relationships
Yeah,
sometimes,
I would
or
say
maybe
so.
even fundamentally, but like just particularly the boundary stuff, which I know you and I have said, like, that could be an 8,000 year long conversation.
Sure, yeah. And it's unfortunate too because just like proper healthy boundaries are not only like not that difficult to do at a personal level, but also like super duper rewarding. Um,
Mhm.
even so much as just saying like, "Hey, I don't like this," and doesn't have to do with anything like sexual or even anything super important. But as soon as we get away from like
Yeah.
you're describing like the fawn mentality, it's just really empowering. It's just I
Mhm.
guess it's just really important that when partners do express boundaries, that we don't push back on them super hard. Because a lot of times when
Yeah.
somebody expresses a boundary, I think it's really almost natural for you to feel like you had done something wrong and try to remedy the thing that put the boundary into place to begin with, when really it probably had nothing to do with you. It's just like,
Right.
hey, I realize that maybe I don't like how something went down, so like this is a boundary for me. This is something I wouldn't like to happen. And instead of trying to like
Mhm.
debate them out of their feelings on something, we can just sort of like move forward and respect that boundary. But I think that a lot of times we inadvertently try to debate somebody out of their feelings on something to make ourselves feel better,
Mhm.
and don't really know that that's what we're doing.
Right. Because it's hard to be told, this hurt me, or your behavior had a negative impact on me. That sucks. But it's
Sure.
also just the reality of being a human. We're going to harm, we're going to hurt. It just happens. It's not about, I mean, it is about the harm and the hurt, but it's also more about the accountability afterwards, right? What are you doing to then potentially remedy the situation? Are you even acknowledging that that was harm or not?
Hmm.
Which is, again, much easier said than done sometimes.
Um, Let me pull back up my notes, and I 100% agree with that too.
Yeah.
Like there they are. Um, so actually, I didn't even ask you some of the most important things that I had on here. Well, how would you define the difference between consent and enthusiastic consent?
So we really don't have a difference in it, because the way that we define consent is sort of by characteristic. So when I talk about it in our presentation, and when we talk about it just in like conversations in fire or team meetings or anything like that, we always talk about how it is automatically enthusiastic, right? Like, if it is not enthusiastic, we should be a little bit questioning. It's one thing to hear a partner say, like, yes, I want to do that thing. It's another thing for our partner to say, sure, right? Like,
Yeah,
sure, maybe is consent, but we should check in, right? It's just a point of like, does my partner really want to do that? Do my partners want to do that? Does my friend want to do that thing?
sure,
I always try to bring it out of the context of sex, frankly, in our presentations, because I think that we get too wrapped up in sex. Our egos get really wrapped up in it. So when we can
sure,
talk about it more in the sense of, if you were going to ask your friend to, in non-COVID times, if you're going
sure,
to ask your friend to go out to eat and they said, yes, I want to eat so badly, I'm starving, right? Like, that's so great. They're very
sure.
excited, very enthusiastic. But if your friend goes, Sure, right? Like maybe you'll check in on them. Maybe they do want to go out to eat, but they also have something else to say, right? Or
Sure.
maybe they don't actually want to go out to eat and they're just saying sure because it's maybe a natural response. Maybe you usually go out to eat. Or maybe they're just saying it because they don't want you to feel bad.
Sure.
It's just a point of checking in. It's not necessarily saying it's automatically not consent if we don't have that wild enthusiasm, because sometimes people just don't, and that's okay. But it's more just kind of like, ooh, like, okay, I didn't really hear a ton of enthusiasm. Should I check in that moment? But we also talk about how consent is revocable, right? Like, I can
Yeah.
change my mind, and that is okay. You can change your mind. That person over there can change their mind. All of that is fine. We also talk about the voluntariness of it. Everybody should be doing this out of their own free will, not being coerced in any way, not being threatened, pressured, talked into it. Um, so yeah, I guess I don't really have much of a difference between like just like a sure or like a yeah versus that enthusiastic consent, but rather I think of it, if we don't feel like there's enthusiasm there, we should at least check in and make sure things are going as okay as they can.
Sure. Um, okay. Um, so one of the things that I heard that I liked a lot about, at least how I like, so like, like working within the idea of like being, really proactive in making sure that we have enthusiastic consent is like to give people outs. Until
Yeah.
recently, that wasn't something that I had heard of, and I was like, that's probably the best thing that I've ever heard,
Mm,
because I feel like that's something that can really help combat like fawning.
mm-hmm.
If you can say like, hey, do you want to do the thing, or do you have something else going on? Just that
Right.
alone is very much you opening up the door. But I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that that makes it like definitive still,
Mm-hmm.
but like damn, like I guess like the onus, like I feel like starts leaving the other person a lot more, like they're really trying to build up a case to make sure that they understand things.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I really think that that is so it's just such a good way, I think, of doing relationships regardless of if sex is the thing.
Yeah.
But just like giving people that out, right? Like it just feels more comfortable, and feels less and not that folks are necessarily trying to pressure people, but when we feel like we only have the option to say yes, right? Like that can feel coercive.
Yeah.
So even if a person doesn't mean that, it can still have that sort of impact. So giving that out, even if it's just the slightest out, right? Like it's something. It gives a different avenue or feels like a different avenue that could be taken.
I feel like you're presenting the idea that there is not going to be a negative ramification for your decision to decline.
By giving that out, yes. I
Yeah,
mean, I
yeah.
wish that we could. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like it just Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, you bring up such a good point. It feels safer. Whether that's physically safer, emotionally safer, mentally safer, whatever it might be, it feels safer now because I have that out, because I was given that out in a way.
Yeah, I can imagine, like, especially like if somebody's in a situation where they feel like there might be violence towards them, if they decline, whether accurately assuming or not, it could just be like a learned behavior. Just having that out is like, oh, this isn't like a do or die situation. They're literally expressing like that, like, I think that that can go like infinitely far in trying to remedy some of like the worst like innate coercive elements.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't remedy that for the person, it's probably just the person's personal trauma, and that the other person really has no way of being able to detect at that point.
Right. Yeah. Which I think is like its own kind of issue in itself of um how to heal from trauma, how to find the resources to heal, finding the right potential therapist,
Sure.
having a therapist who is fully trained, like all of that then makes that harder.
Yeah.
But a point to bring up, and a point that's, I think, really important, because it can be really tough to be in a relationship where your partner or partners are bringing in behaviors that don't jive with this relationship now. If those were things that protected them in the past and those situations are not happening in this dynamic anymore, it can be so hard to realize that as the person who
Hmm.
has experienced the trauma, but it's also then like on us to navigate that, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not our fault that somebody put trauma onto us, inflicted trauma on us, but it is now our responsibility to heal from that and to determine what boundaries now look like in this non-traumatic situation.
Sure. I'm a really big advocate of how would I put this? Like it's not my current partner's responsibility to it's on me to make them understand if I'm carrying any like trauma from somebody else. Um,
Right.
like I can't blame them for I guess being themselves if it reminds me of something or something like that. It's on me to express that. And if I don't,
Mhm.
I certainly can't. And then there's certain things too that I think a lot of people don't understand is that like because there's some issues like if I have a problem with something that it's not necessarily on my partner to fix either. That's a me problem.
Mhm.
Like in polyamorous relationships, one of the big things is like jealousy. If I feel jealous about something, that's not their fault. That's a me
Mhm.
problem, and I can talk about how I feel, but it's important that I'm careful with how I talk about how I feel about it so that I don't make the other person feel like they're doing something wrong.
Right.
And I think that when we're dealing with like certain kinds of trauma too, it's important. I think it's probably really hard for people to like maintain good relationships if they're having issues that aren't like on the other person to fix, because it's really hard to communicate those sorts of things without making the other person feel like you're putting it on them, which should inadvertently make things more complicated. Almost always. Sometimes you have like a super amazing partner who totally gets it and they understand that you're not trying to, even though you're doing a really poor job, and that's just fucking awesome. But we live in a very non-ideal world where that usually doesn't happen, which can cause like a lot of uncomfortable situations for people.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And I think that maybe we probably run into problems where like maybe we may have given like textbook consent and things like that, but we didn't want to because of trauma and things like that, because we're not talking about these things, or we're not like placing the responsibility where it's supposed to be, just simply because we don't have the tools to. Nobody's had a conversation like this to us for them to be able to identify those traits and things like that.
Mhm.
Do you see stuff like that a lot?
Not really, because I think at this point most of my work is like delivering the presentations more so than working with survivors, but I do hope to in the future.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's why I'm getting my MSW so that I can work in more counseling and therapy contexts with survivors. Um, and not necessarily their partners, but I'd be interested in kind of going that route too, because we also need folks who can navigate behavior change with people, and more thinking of like perpetrators, frankly, but who can navigate behavior change with folks who do cause harm in that way.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I think that because like I definitely know that there's sometimes people have done like bad things, or maybe like committed sexual assault by mistake and didn't know. And I certainly think there's a path forward. So I had an instance where I definitely made somebody feel uncomfortable and didn't understand it. Nobody else that was there thought that I had done anything wrong. I certainly didn't. But the person literally felt like they were raped, and I didn't do anything. Like I never like penetrated this person or anything like that. We had both been drinking and we were making out a lot. And like I tried to make a move like towards the pants. They were like, no. And I was like, cool. And then like things seemed to have gotten more aggressive on their end. So I tried again, not like forcefully or anything, and they said no, and it was cool. And then like I left. But like that alone was super traumatic to them. And like when they told other people about it, like I was super mad. I didn't like go and attack this person. But, like I defended myself super hard. I was like, that bitch is crazy. I did nothing. Like I tried and was told no. Things seemed to have gotten a little bit heavier. So I tried again and was told no, and then I stopped. And I was like, okay, 0 for 2, we're good. But I had no idea that I was actually doing anything wrong. But the thing that was done wrong is that we were both like like the main thing that we did wrong was like we were both intoxicated and shouldn't have been doing it to begin with, because it's super hard to read other people's body languages. I thought I had a good idea. I didn't. And I certainly responded to the no's. Um, and like I don't know like how much like maybe I shouldn't have like assumed again like at this the second point, but like being intoxicated can be kind of hard to tell. Um, So like that's something that I think about a lot when it's like I think that people can certainly not understand. Um, and like I know if I told this to certain people, they would think that I was terrible for that too. But like I guess I don't necessarily think that I was terrible, but I'm super unfortunate that that person had to go through that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess we definitely shouldn't have been drinking. And that was probably the first time I ever first time I ever had been drinking. Like I missed like 5 hours worth of time, and when I came to, there was the chick who we were hanging out with like on top of me on my buddy's couch making out with me. It was wild. Like it went from daylight to dark out.
Yeah.
And for I guess for both parts of it too, I was like really well out of it, and I thought that she was my girlfriend at the time. And then when the second no had happened to, I was like, the fuck is going on? Like she has never ever. And I got up, I seen some crazy stuff going on behind me, and I saw who she was, and I was like, I gotta go.
Yeah.
And I got up and I left. That was the craziest shit ever. But still like I know that not like I guess nothing had happened before the making out. I had assumed because nothing. She was on top of me making out with me. Like I didn't really have like a whole lot of ability to do anything prior to that. I would assume. And she certainly seemed like that was like a good part for her, but then like I don't know, I just got out of there, and this was just a really clear example to me of how like things can be misconstrued, and people can have very different versions of the same event.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely after, and it took me a long time to understand that too, reflecting on it, to where I wasn't even like to where I stopped like being mad at her for like telling people like about it in that light, because like what the fuck did I do to
Mm-hmm.
me? Now I just feel like super duper bad. And if I had any way of contacting her, I'd probably say I was sorry.
Right.
Probably in as few words as possible, because I would imagine she probably doesn't want to talk to me because she has a horrible experience with me.
Right.
But definitely changes how I think about things and how I move forward and how I shape my behavior. For
Mm-hmm.
sure. Um,
Yeah, and I honestly I think that's the key of it is that yeah, that shit happened. That's the reality.
yeah,
And also like it's hard for you because there was like you said that 5 hour kind of gap of like whoa, like time happened, I guess.
yeah.
Um but
And just to be clear
it's
too, nothing was
your
purported to have happened that I didn't just describe either. But
right,
to her,
right,
that was like literal rape in her mind. And like I can't tell
right,
her that she's not valid for feeling that or anything. But like I guess like to me, that's not what those words meant.
right.
Um,
And in terms of like if we're thinking like legal context, like that is
sure,
not the definition.
sure,
But I think the point of it is that she felt violated, right? Like
yeah,
she
yeah,
felt uncomfortable,
yeah,
and like you said, that's not something that you or frankly anybody can say is untrue because that's how she felt about it.
sure,
Um, but I think what's key here is that you are like you are at that point of realization that like yeah, you maybe didn't think anything was wrong. You felt like you paid attention
yeah,
to the point that you could at least.
yeah. I stopped when I was
And
told
that
no. You know,
exactly, exactly, exactly. And you are realizing that even though you were not negatively impacted by it, or not maybe not as negatively impacted, that she had that situation, that that's how it felt for her. And I wish so badly that that's how everybody could see those situations because I think you know when the Aziz Ansari story came out, right? Like
hmm,
I imagine that he probably thought he was not in the wrong at all.
sure.
He thought of it as maybe a bad date. For context, if folks don't know, there was a whole story that came out. I recommend just reading the survivor's point of view of it, or maybe if Aziz has come out and said something, I wouldn't necessarily dissuade you from reading that
He
side.
did
But
in his
more,
most recent stand up. He talked about it and explained why it was wrong, but why, like, I guess he explained, like, how he felt about it during the time and
mm-hmm,
then, like what it ended up being.
mm-hmm.
So it was really good.
Yeah, I haven't watched it, so I can't say. And I again, persuade people. It's more that I'm just not going to explain it here.
Sure.
But I encourage folks to look at it because I think the initial thought was like, for particularly a lot of cis men, was like, oh, that just sounds like a bad date.
Yeah.
But for a lot of cis women, like that's fucking violence. Sorry for the swear. Hee hee.
No,
One.
you
um,
basically you can say whatever you want on my stream, just no N word. That'll get me kicked off the platform.
yeah,
I'm an affiliate, so
I would never.
I can get in
So,
trouble. I, I get some kind of like ad kickback and like subscribers money, so
ooh.
that would be bad.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do that.
Okay.
Pinky promise.
Uh,
Um, but yeah, so all that to be said, I think the difference is that yeah, a lot of people just see that as like, oh, it wasn't that great or it wasn't that wonderful, and then don't take into account that folks who are experiencing this and feel that it is negative, that is
sure.
still their truth. Even if your reality wasn't that it was bad, that doesn't mean it wasn't bad for that person who experienced it, who survived it.
Sure.
Um, and if we could get to that level, right, of understanding that that doesn't make us evil people or even bad people, there are no good or bad people. There's just appropriate and inappropriate behaviors. And for that person, it felt inappropriate. It felt like it shouldn't have happened.
Sure.
And so then after that, we can look at, okay, well, what does remedy look like? Does it look like never talking to that person again? Does it look like attending some courses as recommended maybe by that survivor in their community or something?
Hmm.
Does it look like making a public post about it? It really depends, I think, on that person who experienced that harm.
Sure. And I feel really bad when I think about it too, because like her friend who was in the room, like, and nobody gave her any credibility to what she said because everybody felt the same way as me. And it wasn't like her best friend was there and was like, "You shouldn't have said that. That's not what happened." But also
Mm.
too, at that point, let's see, this would have been, fuck, I'm so old, at like 15-ish years ago. So at that point, like, I don't think that our perceptions of like what sexual assault meant, like by that time, I feel like by the definitions that we had at the time, like, I would have been correct by our understanding of that, and just like her feelings weren't validated by like our perceptions of how things, how we perceive things now. Her feelings are more acceptable or accepted, sorry, in line with how we think about things now, rather than how we thought about things then. Because like I can imagine when I was in high school, almost nobody would have ever put like what had happened into the context of sexual
Oh
assault.
yeah.
They would have been like, you were like awesome, you were drunk and you still like didn't do the thing, like you responded to the no stuff. Like they would almost like pat you on the back for that. Not that anybody did then either, but like that's just generally how things were perceived at that point in time.
Mhm.
And like I'm pretty sure that like at least like her one friend, and somebody else who was my friend, I think they probably threw shit at her for it too. So like that's, and I didn't really hang out with her much before that, or definitely never hung out with her after that. Like I was just sort of like aware of her before she went to my school. So it wasn't like super easy kind of thing to like find her on Facebook. I don't, it was like a crazy last name and then got married too. So like I wouldn't even know how to approach her, or even if she would want me to apologize. But I think that if I ever saw a post or something, I would probably PM and say like, "Hey, I'm sorry." Like I don't know, and then like I don't know. You worked with me at Childers. I'm pretty good at like giving like a long drawn out thing about how I feel about something. So I'd probably send something like that, and then hope that that just at least gave some validation rather than making things feel worse.
Right.
And I think that probably too we'd be a lot better off if when people made mistakes that they were able to talk about it more freely.
Yes.
So I think that one of the unintended consequences of like the Me Too movement is that because of how badly punished people, justifiably so, a lot of people have been, it also makes a lot of people who have done things feel like maybe that they can't talk about like where their perspectives were about things, because like they have a lot to lose in doing so. It's easy for me to talk about it because like what are you gonna do?
Mhm.
Kick me off of Twitch and make me lose my 3 subscribers? Like that, like I don't have a lot at stake here.
Right.
But so it's really hard for people that are especially in the public light to come and say like, hey, like to try to get like maybe I guess like if like they were thinking about it in a PR way to like get a jump on things and say and talk about it. Which could also be complicated because maybe the people that endured it didn't want it to go public anyways and all that shit too. Like, it's all very complicated, but it's really
It
hard for
is.
people to say like, "Hey, I made a mistake. Like I didn't understand this or that," or like it's really hard for them to speak like what they feel was the what happened and like their truth about it, because it will only have severe negative consequences, and maybe that they won't be able to be seen as telling the truth about it and all that.
Mhm.
I 100% support like pretty much every movement that's ever come out against calling out sexual predators and sexual assault, but there are some negative consequences to it too. Good definitely outweighs the bad. But I just wonder how we can get to a point to where people can talk about the mistakes that they've made, and still be seen as like telling the truth, because it's almost like there's nothing to be learned from here, because nobody hearing it is going to accept this as this person telling the truth, so we don't get the learning experience out of it. It'd probably be pretty fucking useful for people to avoid doing what they did. So I don't know how to remedy that, because it's not like we can tone down like the just punishment of anybody who's done wrong things. But it would be really, really helpful if we had some sort of way for people to say those kinds of things, because it's especially like from men, when they're only hearing women talk about it, and then like a man on the defensive, that's not going to go a long way at dissuading men that persuading men that their behaviors are bad. This is going to go a long way at persuading men that like women are bad, and we've seen this has been demonstrated really, really well. Just so you know, it's not super comfortable when we talk about these things in this context. I just think it's an important point that just like isn't very easy to bring up. It's not like I'm not like rooting for men in any way, shape, or form in this like context of the conversation. It's just that I try to put my own feelings aside and try to objectively assess like moral situations.
Yeah, and I can agree to a certain extent. I super don't agree about the severe consequences, because ultimately, like, what do we see? We saw Trump still be president. We saw Brett Kavanaugh still get to be in the Supreme Court position.
Sure.
Harvey Weinstein still has a shitload of money. Louis C.K. is fine. Like, all of these people who were really brought up as perpetrators in the Me Too movement ultimately faced like the least ramifications possible, in my opinion.
I was speaking from the public perspective. It's definitely seen as they're losing. They're losing a lot. To be fair, Louis C.K. lost $37 million in one day. He probably lost more than a lot of people did.
And he's still doing stand-up though, so like
nobody's picking it up though. Can you give me an can you so I have a certain understanding of what happened with Louis C.K. And my understanding was too that he did have consent of everybody, which made it one of like the weirder ones. It's just that it wasn't like enthusiastic consent.
I have not heard that he had consent, but I will say I'm also not super knowledgeable on the whole situation. It's not like a case that I really dived into personally, but as far as I know, I didn't know that there was consent involved into it, or involved in it. But all that to be said is, not that I'm like feeling negative at you, because I want to make that clear that like I'm still like, hey.
Sure.
But more the idea that frankly there are not enough consequences for perpetrators. And not that I'm like
generally speaking,
or for prisons. I don't think that those are effective. But if we're still thinking in that sort of idea of the incarceration system, most perpetrators don't even spend a day in jail for their crime. And so when I hear that brought up, I feel challenged internally, because I'm like, survivors go through way more than perpetrators ever will, even if they're found out to have caused harm most of the time. Sometimes folks do face really tough consequences. Sometimes folks who didn't know that they had caused harm in that way also face some really tough consequences that maybe feels really unfair for them. So I also want to say that. But ultimately, I think perpetrators need to have a better understanding of their harm, which goes to what you're saying, though, that it'd be great if more people talked about the harm that they did, not in the way of like, yeah, this is great, but in the way of, I have grown from this, I have learned from this. But I think the issue, or one of the issues in that, is that a lot of times those folks who caused harm aren't doing their announcing in a way that validates the survivor, that like comes from what the survivor needs. And so it'd be, it's one thing to like make this big PR statement, or maybe make a person does a workshop or does some sort of conference on it or something, right? They make some sort of statement. It is another thing to have crafted that statement either with the survivor or with knowing what the survivor would want to be mentioned in the statement. And that doesn't happen enough. And it's tough because sometimes survivors want nothing to do with their perpetrators, and that's also more than valid. But I
That's why I
agree.
said I didn't even know
I
she'd want to hear from
wish.
me.
Right, yeah, it's just tough because I do think having those real stories of I fucked up big time and here's what I did to remedy that and here's what I'm still doing to remedy that would be amazing. There's a book by Peggy Orenstein called Boys and Sex. It came out, I think, last year, and she actually does a whole chapter on this one person who was really involved with sexual violence, like prevention stuff, and through this like educational moment was like, shit, I sexually assaulted somebody. Like I'm just realizing this right now in this like training. Um, and then
Boys
talks
and
about
Sex, you
what
said?
he did. Yeah, I think that's what
Okay,
it's
I'm
called.
I'm
I'll double
gonna
check, make
I'm
sure.
buying it right now on Audible.
Yeah, it's she also has one called Girls and Sex, but it's from earlier. And like it's tough because they're pretty like
Look, I'm willing to give up
heterosis-normative
one credit here.
perspectives. But it's really
God.
good. It's really good.
Okay. She gets one purchase from me up front. If it's really good, then
One
maybe.
purchase.
Well, I'm just saying. I only have
No,
2
yeah,
Audible
that's valid.
credits. The majority of my Audible credits go to like moral philosophy books, which are so fucking boring. You wouldn't believe it. Oh my gosh.
I don't think I could
Like
do it.
I'm into it and it's boring as fuck.
That's funny.
The first 2 hours of fucking like the Kant completion series is 2 hours of him justifying what he hasn't stated yet. It's the worst thing ever. And not like
Nice.
good justifications, like using words that you have to look up. He's basically spends 2 hours saying nothing. It's terrible. But anyways, I got the book. It's in my library. I'll be able to listen to it while I'm playing like Final Fantasy 14 or something, or poker or
Cool.
some shit. Oh, bad review. Without exception, politically correct, misleading, biased, and poorly done. Let's see. Daniel. I
There
don't.
was a
Jim
some
S.
flack
S-
that came from it that it wasn't more like trans inclusive. But she also addresses that at the beginning of this book. I think it was the beginning, at least. Somewhere in the book it is addressed that like it could have been, expanded, but it's a starting place, frankly.
Every single male that gave it a positive review that I see mentions that they're a parent. Um, and every single negative review is definitely a guy. Yeah. So these, yeah. Seems like every person that's not like super hard like inselling here is like 5-starring it in every category. So seems good.
Solid. Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I think it's good. Again, I think it's a starting place. I don't think it's a perfect body of work,
there's
but
a
I
link
think
to
it's
it.
useful.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
It seems like it, at least from the what you said, and then like I read a couple quickly while we were talking, a couple of the reviews from people that did like it. Wow, one of them's like a fucking book in its own. Um, so what do you That sucks too that you don't know a lot about Louis C.K. because I specifically wanted to ask you about the Louis C.K. thing.
Sorry.
Because when I heard about it, like, so can I put it in the context of how I understood it to go?
Sure.
So the context that I understood the Louis C.K. Sexual assault was that he he got consent from all the people and to masturbate in front of them, and then he did. But the consent was given. They felt coerced in that they didn't think they could say no to a celebrity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always had really mixed feelings about that because like how I said, we have a hard time finding like looking for issues when we're giving the affirmative. And like I don't know if like him just being a stand-up comedian in and of itself is inherently coercive. So like I guess I just don't know how much like he could have known ahead of time. And then from like a lot of people's perspective, he never touched anybody. He was given consent, so it just seemed really hard to like nail him as hard as they did for like basically meeting a lot of criteria that most people would say pretty safe.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's my understanding of it. There might be information that I have gotten bad or anything like that. I'm certainly not like omniscient or anything like that. But meeting that criteria, that's not what you were to understand had happened.
So I actually just looked up a quick article. This is not. I don't think it's the most. What is the word? Like, I don't think it's the most valid source, but it is saying that some folks said that consent was there, but that other survivors are saying that they did not agree or ask for that to happen. So I think it's tough because, at that point it's like word against word. But
Gotcha.
even if the situation involved, and it's tough because I do think we need to be considerate of power dynamics. I do think it's really inappropriate if Louis C.K. was doing that to fans. Like, yeah, he has power over those people because they're adoring him, right? Like, if you're a fan of something, you're like, yeehaw, like that sounds great, you can do no wrong, and maybe feel that pressure to, do something, perform, or allow somebody that you feel so strongly to perform in front of you. Those power dynamics are really important to be considered of. But I also don't think that everybody who came out as, victims of this violence, of this harm, of this situation, I don't know that all of them were fans either. So I think that makes it a little bit hard too. But we need to think about manipulation that's happening there as well. And I'm not saying that Louis C.K. was manipulating anybody because I, again, not super knowledgeable on that case in particular. But yeah, I think that folks who are saying I felt like I couldn't say no, so I said yes, like that was because of the power imbalance there. Probably, again, not super knowledgeable, so I'm not super sure on that.
Sure. I guess, do you think that it's always inappropriate for a like celebrity to engage in some kind of sexual interaction with a fan?
I think it kind of goes in not the same category, but like a placement next to the category of like involving any sort of drug in a sexual situation, is that it just makes it riskier. It's
Sure.
harder to know if a person is engaging in that situation because they want to, or because they feel starstruck in a way, or they feel, you know, I don't know if coerced is quite the word for it, but they feel that like obligation because it's like, oh, it's this person and I adore them. I feel
Sure.
like there's been a ton of things coming out with other people who have like sent things to their fans, like sent nudes to their fans and stuff like that, or requested nudes from fans, and it's just, I personally, I don't really think that's appropriate.
To me, that's different too, because like you really can't like there's no exchange of consent there. To be honest, I think that unsolicited dick pics is one of the most horrible things like in life. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Like literally, like I could never ever. I think I've sent 2 ever, and they were explicitly asked for, and it still felt awful. Like, well, sorry, at least not in adult life, since like maybe like online dating, it's been asked for more, and I still have to use the same one from when I was like 19 because I won't even take anymore. I hate them. I hate it so much. Just because whenever I hear about it, it makes me feel horrible. Like it is the only time in life where I will like genuinely feel like gross to be a man. Like I don't take responsibility for like anything that like men do in general if I don't participate in that behavior. But that is the one thing that just makes me feel gross inherently for having a penis. It is the worst thing ever. So like if I'm talking to anybody and they even approach like talking about news or whatever, I say right away like I will not ever send an unsolicited dick pic. You have to be very clear if that's what you're looking for, because I am not going to take a hint. It's not going to fucking happen. That is terrible to me.
Not gonna take a hint.
I just feel like it's the most socially accepted form of sexual assault that I've ever seen. And like it's not even like seen as a big deal. That's horrible. To be fair, I had to sit by my friend who was on Omegle when I was like 17, like all the time, and I got so many unsolicited dicks in my peripherals. It was crazy.
Oh, yeah.
It's crazy. Like,
Omegle is its own
like
trauma source, I think, for many people.
I didn't go there though. I wasn't the one there. He was just next to me, and just the waves of fucking penis that I did not ask for has changed me.
Oh,
that is a dick gauntlet. And it's so bad.
You know what? That should be, frankly, their tagline. think it would prepare people more.
I actually made a Wikipedia page for Omegle once that got taken down really fast, where I characterized it as an MMORPG where you had to battle your way through dicks and like for the chance of like exceedingly low drops of like female nudes. Like there's like a 0.01% chance of like this nude. Because that's basically what he was doing. He was like hunting to find like nude females on it. But like I was like, the cost benefit analysis is so poor here. Why don't you just go to a campsite? like there are sites that are made exactly for what you're looking for. Give them $5. They will do a private show for you. Stop.
Right, exactly.
Like, are you this broke?
Compensating those people too, like.
Yeah. Like, oh my god, man. Like I remember just like at one point like feeling almost sick from the amount of penis that I had been forced to endure. And I feel like over the course of those weeks, hours on end, I probably got like average female amount of dick pics. Hopefully you guys get less. I hope you get less than the undoubtedly over 1,000 dicks that I had to see.
You know, you'd be surprised.
I hope. I said I hope.
Yeah, and granted,
I hope
like,
that not that
feel
many
like
people
I'm
have your
really-
number.
Well, right. That's the thing is that like I'm out of the game, right? Like I've been in a very committed relationship for
That doesn't
almost
stop the
4
dick
years,
pics.
but they do because I don't engage with anyone. It feels like who would even think to send a dick pic in that way.
I know people get them from
but
their bosses and shit.
Well, right. That's what I'm saying is that like none of my bosses have penises and would
Oh,
do.
sure.
Not to brag. But yeah, so like personally, I don't know how often it happens anymore, but prior to my relationship and when I was working in different places, yeah. Like weekly count, I couldn't tell you. So and yeah, that's something that I also talk about in our presentation is that because I think oftentimes when people think about, revenge porn or using nudes as a way of, facilitating some sort of sexual violence, they think of it in the way of somebody sending their picture and then that person posting it online, sending it to their friends, even, trying to make money off of it. That's not the only way that it happens. It's also through these unsolicited photos too.
Sure.
And I see it in the audience where people are like, right, like. Or we've also had people on campus, and I think this is also, unfortunately, rather common, people watching porn in class. Also sexual harassment. Like those
Yeah,
folks
absolutely.
behind you are not consenting. We had somebody in our presentation about sexual misconduct doing that. And it's because it's so like, oh, this doesn't count, but like no, yeah, if folks are not consenting to seeing that sexual situation happen, you betcha like that maybe it's not trauma, but it's inappropriate. Like that shouldn't happen.
I think I would just die if I seen somebody in public watching porn.
Too often.
That's
Too
crazy.
often.
Like I don't know. I mean I would probably laugh a lot just because like I would be so shocked.
Yeah.
Like the shock value,
dark.
the shock value would be tremendous. Like you know what though? I feel like it would only get funnier the older the person was that was watching it, and like based on age and gender. So like 18-year-old guy watching porn on a bus, like dude, stop. There's other people on here. Like 80-year-old man watching porn on a bus on like his like iPhone 3. Fucking hilarious. 80-year-old woman watching porn on the bus. Fucking, I'm telling everybody that I meet for like the next 20 years. Hilarious.
I'm telling everybody. Jeez, oh please.
And then like if somebody's sitting next to her, like, ma'am, could you turn that off? Leave me alone. And just like goes right back to incredible. Oh my gosh.
See, and this is where we differ. And that's okay. But the thing,
the humor is based on the unexpectedness of the situation.
Very
However,
true.
not ignoring the fact that they're still sexually harassing people.
Right. And I think
it's
it
just
brings up a
rare.
good point too, which I think we had said earlier, that it doesn't have to be trauma, right? Like, I
Sure.
don't have to be traumatically impacted by it. But if I saw like an 80-year-old woman watching porn on a bus, that'd be a little jarring for me. Like that.
I mean, I didn't say I wouldn't be jarred. I'd be fucked right up.
Jeez.
However, usually things that are jarring to me are usually pretty funny. Like if I think about something horrible in my head, it usually makes me laugh. Like that's my reaction to things that jar me.
Sure.
Which isn't to say that like I expect everybody to think that that's funny or that I think that it's right. Usually, when something horrible happens, outside of people being physically harmed, like I can't deal with seeing people get hurt physically. I can't deal with it at all. But like everything else, pretty much makes me laugh super duper hard. Like the idea of saying something horrible that I'm not supposed to say in a social situation makes me laugh. I won't do it, but that makes me laugh super hard.
Sure. Sure.
Things like I guess like unattempted shock value humor is fantastic to me. Like circumstantial, accidental, shocking things like that aren't done for humor. That's the cream of the crop for me. So like
Yeah.
80-year-old woman watching porn on like the only way it could have been better if she had a tablet. Like oh my gosh, instead of a phone, just like you would never expect in 100 years to run into that, right?
Can't
Right.
say I would.
Because, like, you would probably stare at that tablet for a good 30 seconds because your brain just would not interpret that she was watching porn. You're like, what are those people doing? Like, what is she watching? They're like, then you
Or
just be
it'd
like,
be
wait,
like, that's a
what?
weird ad.
Yeah, like, what? What?
Yeah.
What? Like, have you ever seen something so shocking that you just literally couldn't recognize it at first? You had to, like, stare for a bit? And then you realize, like,
Nothing
you're
comes
weird
to
for
mind.
staring? Oh, I definitely have. I've walked in on people having sex not knowing, and I just stood there and I was just like, I remember I just saw like balls at first, like, is that an armpit? And I'm just like standing there like this, just like, what the fuck is going on? And
Armpit?
yeah, and I was just like, God, my brain just literally wouldn't let me process what I was seeing. So I'm just like standing there watching, just trying to figure out what the fuck's happening in front of my face. I'm like, oh shit! And then I just fucking left. But that's hilarious. Or like I remember this guy I worked at Hungry Howie's and this my boss, she was missing a finger and I didn't know she was missing a finger, and I put the pizza on the metal table to cut it, and she said, hey, no, put it in the box first, because otherwise when you go to touch the thing you'll burn your hand. And guy said that's how she lost her finger, and I didn't know, so I just thought he was being a smartass, and I stared at her hand for like 30 seconds because like just like looking for the missing finger. And like it was there, but my brain was like, we're just gonna show you a finger for a while. And then when I realized it, I was like, you fucking asshole, you made me stare at her hand that didn't have a finger for like so long because I just couldn't process the fact that she was actually missing the finger.
Yeah. I don't even think I have a response.
You've never
But
experienced anything like that where your brain like safeguards you from the unexpected? Oh, I lost you for a minute. There you go, you're back.
Oh, hey. No, not that I can think of. I'm sure I have, but it like nothing is coming to mind. But I also like I know what you're talking about. Like I understand that is like very real and happened. And it, in many ways is funny in that sense of like how jarring it is. Like you're just like, I have no other response but to giggle right now. Like I don't know what to do. Cannot compute, right? Like
Well, and because of that too, the situation that it creates, now somebody else might see me watching porn on the old lady's tablet trying to figure out what it is, but to them I'm just watching over her shoulder.
oh my
Phenomenal
God.
situation. That's exactly how that would go down for me too. I am not lucky enough to have that happen any other way. Like it would just be like somebody's like, that guy's really watching porn over that old lady's shoulder right now, and nobody would ever believe me. Oh man, did I ever tell you about the thing that like I'm 100% what?
Just want to let you know it's 8:30, which means Andon didn't come over, which means John's car's not getting jumped.
Okay, we can jump from somebody else last cabin or something.
He has his appointment at like 11 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, well I'm still streaming and stuff.
Oh,
so.
I didn't know you were streaming.
Yeah.
This is my show now. Hi, everyone.
Sorry.
Hello. Did I ever tell you like that? Did I ever tell you my story about McDonald's? So this is on my side, literally 100% innocent. And at the end of the story, you'll know I did nothing wrong. But to the other side, I definitely was seen as the creepiest, worst motherfucker, like borderline sexual harassment here. I never told you about this? Okay, so I worked at a McDonald's, and like honestly, one of the worst moments of my whole entire life. So I worked at a McDonald's, and the drive-through has like a long hallway going down it where there's like a manager's office. Like if you can imagine, drive-through window against the wall. You shoot down there. That's where all of our drinks are. And then from the drive-through, there's like a little like you know like typical McDonald's are shaped. You have like your fryers and shit, and then there's like a little wall drive-through, and then it goes down to like the other drive-through window. We didn't have another drive-through window. We just had like the manager's office thing. And I'm like one of the most busybody workers there. The manager there really likes me. Already on my third day, he's made it known that like I'm one of the best employees. Because like I actually tried his minimum wage job in the city. Nobody gives a fuck. But I did because I needed a job super bad. So I'm like sweating. I'm running around grabbing shit, and I'm thinking about my Powerade around the corner. And like a lot of times when I'm thinking, I'll like mouth things to myself. And as I'm coming around the corner with whatever I had in my hand, I don't remember anymore, I mouthed the words thinking in my Powerade, I gotta slam that. And as I turn the corner, there's a female coworker bent over in front of me, and my boss, who is a very self-described angry lesbian. This is how she described herself to me during my interview. Seen me mouth the words, I gotta slam that, with a chick bent over in front of me, and goes, Jamie, go in the back and get some more cups. And I just sort of like dial-up connection for a moment, and then I pieced everything together, and I was like, oh no. And so I went in the back and just had an absolute panic attack, like, nobody's ever going to believe me. I'm going to get fired. My friend's letting me stay with him so that I can get enough money to move out on my own. They're going to think I got fired for fucking being a fucking creep. Like, I'm going to lose where I live. Like, this is all so bad. And I just paused for a moment, like, this is something that would only ever happen to me. Like, I just have this kind of luck to where I get put in a situation where it's impossible. I wouldn't believe me, but I was there. I know what happened, but like, it's crazier than fiction. Nobody would ever believe me. And I didn't get in any trouble, but they all treated me super weird for like 2 weeks. And it was awful. And I hated every moment of it because, like, I'm not the guy you think I am. I swear to God. And, like, the day before, that chick and I talked, like, the entire shift, too. So I definitely assumed that they got the perception that, like, I was hitting on her all day the day before, and now it was, like, just, like, totally gross. Like, I'm a fucker. Like, there was no other way. Like, when I came back up after getting the cups, the one chick started making fun of my beard and stuff. Like, a total 180 as to how that chick had treated me. And I was just like, this is just the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awful.
But at the same time, too, it's like one of the funniest stories that I have for people. Because it's just so unexpected and unfortunate.
Yeah, it is.
And see, like, I genuinely didn't do anything wrong. And, like, you know me. You know how I am when I work. Tell me that's not, like, 1,000% plausible.
I wouldn't have doubted if you would have said that happened at Chiller Sprinkles.
See what I'm saying? Like, I'm very much in my own head a lot while I'm working.
Yes, you are. But that's not bad. It just then also leads to these moments, or rather, this moment in particular that socially, I'm sure, yeah, everybody was probably like, are you kidding? Like, and then also acted in the way of like,
appropriately outraged.
Exactly, like, we gotta reel it back on this one, you know?
And when I was in the back there, I eventually calmed myself down. I was like, you know what? She probably just needed cups. It's probably fine. Like I was like, you know what? You're just overreacting. Like, things do seem really bad, but you're probably the only one that noticed these things. And I came back, and like all the women were grouped around the fucking cart by the fucking drive-through, and then one of them looked over at me and sort of sneered, and I was just like, fuck! I was right!
Yeah.
All the worst things that I thought were true.
Yeah. And I have to agree, like, that could only happen to you.
Most people didn't even talk like that. But like that's definitely how like if I knew I wasn't gonna be able to get some water or something, I'd probably still think like I gotta slam that water real fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had like rapid fire thoughts going, and it's just all bad. It's just all bad. Just all
That's
super
rough.
unfortunate. Yeah.
Rough situation.
So I'll get back on track. How do you did you used to work more with people on an individual basis, or like do like more questions and answers with people, like where you got like pushback and things like that from people who like disagreed with your message?
Yeah, we actually had a pretty tough situation this past fall in a presentation where this one uh man, he was making a bunch of different comments about how sort of just trivializing everything that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the very last things that we talk about are ways to support survivors. And the first thing that we always say is believe survivors. You know, they're if somebody's going to come to you and tell you their story, they probably trust you. And so there's that level of relationship there, we'd assume. And so you're probably going to believe your friend no matter what anyway. It feels a little redundant to say believe survivors, but we say it to really emphasize like most survivors are telling the truth. Like we
Sure.
know that this is true. And instantly he goes, well, you know, doesn't that mean that we assume that the other person is automatically guilty? What about innocent until proven guilty? And it was my students who were up there and who were just like, we're not the criminal justice system. Like, what do you like? That's not what we're saying. It is two different things to say that we believe a survivor and to blame somebody else. We are
Yeah.
just validating that person in the moment, and that's what we should do if somebody tells us their stories. So that
Yeah.
was a really big moment of pushback that he really kept going with it until another student in his actual class stood up and said, listen, I'm a survivor. You're saying the exact same things that I received from many people in my community, and I know I can't trust you now. And it
Sure.
was like that is what like finally got him to stop pushing back so much. And it's unfortunate when survivors have to use their own trauma to say like this is real, like you are playing devil's advocate, and while maybe that can be useful sometimes, in this situation you're going too far, bud. Like
Sure.
reel it back a bit. We're not saying that you person sitting in this classroom are a perpetrator. We're saying that survivors need support here. So that
Sure.
happens rather frequently, but it was a really tough situation this past fall. But honestly, I don't get as much pushback as you might assume that I would, even when I work with specifically men's groups. And I think part of that is because we try to come at it with the an actual conversation, not just you're a bad person, here's everything you do wrong. It's like, hey, like let's just talk about like what relationships look like and what are you doing when you get consent? Are you asking for consent? Are you asked for consent? Do you ever get to give your consent in situations, or is it automatically assumed? Um, so I think that's probably why we don't get as much pushback, is because we're not trying to tell people what to do or how to behave, but rather get them to just think a little bit more about what their relationships are looking like, and if they think that you know there could be things that could be added to make their relationships more meaningful or more enriched or anything like that.
Well, how would you like respond to like so this is actually on my notes too, like a like a mega alpha Chad bro who's just like, what the fuck would I ask a woman for consent? Like, I know what she fucking wants. Like, I never had nobody said that I fucking raped him before, so why the fuck should I fucking change my behavior? Just because some people can't fucking read body language, why should I fucking change how I'm behaving? Like, I have sex 5 times a week, most of the time with different chicks. Ain't nobody ever said anything bad about me. Like, so you're telling me I have to change the whole way that I've been doing things because some assholes out there can't fucking read body language? Like, what the fuck? Why is it on me to change?
Thank you for your comment and question. Um, my response to that is that we can't always go based just just off of body language. If I stood up here and started waving my hand, you might assume that I'm waving at you, right? Another person who's experienced trauma before might assume that I'm about to hit them. Those are two separate understandings of the same behavior. And that's what I mean about body language can't be read in the same way as consent alone. Sometimes we can look at body language and it can help guide us in situations. It can help, add more context to situations, but it's not the only thing that we should be basing behaviors or decisions off of. Shoot, there's also something else I was going to say. Come back to me. About body language. Oh, also, things like sexual arousal are not signs that somebody is consenting, wanting, or enjoying anything. Sexual arousal is just another bodily response to stimuli. If I walk outside in a Michigan winter and my nips go, "Hi, it's cold out," doesn't mean that I want to get it on in the snow. It just means that my body's responding to the stimuli around me. So we can't go based off of signs. Or rather, not that we can't because it happens all the time, but rather we shouldn't just go based off of signs. It's okay to not have a full drawn out conversation about consent, but it should be at the top of every sexual interaction. Is this okay? Do you like this? Can I keep going? Can I kiss you here? Can I touch you here? Can we try that thing that we saw in that movie? Are we both flexible enough for that? Like, that's what I mean when I say, like, get consent. It's not like, hello, person by their full name. I'm really interested in having a sexual relationship with you. Are you also interested? And by interested, I mean, would you want to do that tonight at this specific time in this specific location? That's not what I mean. That's never what I mean. And it doesn't mean you have to go around and change your whole being or your whole way of going about having sexual situations. It just means maybe adding one or two questions or one or two check-ins as you're having these moments with people. So that's probably something that I would say. We also talk about how, like, we can't make assumptions in that way. So I have, like, a specific line in my presentation where I talk about clothing, and how clothing is not something that we can use to base our consent off of. And the way that I demonstrate that is, like, if I were up here wearing a football jersey, would anybody assume that they could tackle me? Absolutely not, right? Because one, I'm sensitive, I would cry. Two, it'd be a really awkward situation for everybody involved. And three, we just don't make assumptions when it comes to, football jerseys in that way. Why would we make any other assumptions when it comes to other clothing choices? So
the argument there is always, like, because the purpose of revealing, the people generally says that the purpose of wearing revealing clothing is to reveal parts of you to make yourself more attractive to the opposite sex.
Sure.
That this is generally what people would say, and to which you would say,
I would say there's lots of reasons that people wear clothing. Sometimes it's to show their grieving process. Sometimes it's to feel empowered and feel, hot in their clothing, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's for other people. And additionally, I always bring up how, my presentations are done on college campuses. So I'll say something along the lines of, we, like, live and learn on this college campus. So the best assumption that we can make about a person's clothing choice when it comes to being a WMU student is just that it was the cleanest thing on the top of the pile, right? Like, that's all it can, that would be the best assumption that we could make. And we should never really assume that somebody is dressing for us unless they've explicitly said, I wore this, I hope you like it, right? Like,
Sure.
I want you to enjoy what this looks like on me. And even still, that is not saying I want to have sex because I'm wearing this dress, right?
Sure.
Not always the case. And even if that is what somebody had the intention when they were putting on a certain outfit, or a certain anything else, it's still good to check in. Like,
I mean, their intent can still change too, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Like,
exactly. People can change their mind. People can be, like, butt naked and change their mind, and it's still okay.
Sure. I agree. So I just want to just take up the moniker of the Super Mega Alpha Chad one more time.
Please.
To say, because you said that can't always read body language. I feel like a lot of times they would say something like, well, if she's already agreed to come, if she's already at my house and my tongue is down her throat, like, I'm pretty sure I know where things are going.
You might assume where things are going, especially if you've had situations in the past that continue to reinforce the idea of this path, right? That these steps happen. I get that. That makes sense. It carves out a path in our literal brain. At the same time, we can still change our mind even if we have our tongues in each other's mouths. it's still okay to take a step back and say, don't want to do it anymore, not feeling it anymore. Things come up, emotions change, and that's all right. Another way to think about it is, if you were out to eat with your best friend and suddenly they decided they didn't want to eat anymore, it's not like you're going to like pick up their Subway sandwich and shove it down their throat, right? Like that's not what would happen then. So why is it going to happen in a sexual situation? It doesn't connect very well in that way. So yeah.
Well, I mean, like, so I think a more appropriate metaphor for what this super mega alpha Chad was going for is that, like, if they didn't tell me they didn't want to eat, like, I'm still gonna get up and go and pay for their sub, and then bring them their sandwich.
Maybe they want it later, and that's okay. Same for the sexual situation. Maybe they just don't want it right now. Maybe they want to postpone for another day or two. Maybe they just realize that they have a test and they got to go study for it. Or maybe they're just genuinely not feeling it anymore.
So
That doesn't mean that somebody has to then move forward with it.
I think there's a
not-
miscommunication between what I'm saying and what you're responding to. The idea is that they don't need to ask for the consent because it's already being implied by the things that are going on. Like, they've reached several checkpoints that would imply that consent is being. It's not like they're saying, like, hey, I don't want to do this, and he's like, no, fuck yeah, you do. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the perception is they've already come to the house. Like they were from where they met. They went back to his place. They're already making out. This dude has like checked off his fucking checklist of like I already know where this is going. Like to him, consent has been given here. It just hasn't been a verbal affirmation. So it's not like she's saying like, "Hey, I don't want to." I don't think anybody would argue that if she said, "Hey, I don't want to," now. Like, she don't know what she want. She obviously want. Like, that's not. I don't. That's not where I was trying to go with this.
Gotcha. I think at that point, then I would, especially if they, if this person had used the similar language that you're using of a checklist, I would really emphasize like that is your checklist. Have you checked in on the other person's checklist at all? In a verbal manner, in a way that both of you can agree that the communication happened, because to you, Chad, your checklist has happened, right? You ding, 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 all those things occurred. I guess I would wonder, why is there not an affirmative yes on your checklist? How is that also not part of consent? And two, how can you know that your checklist is complete if you don't know your other person's checklist is complete? If you don't know, and I'm not saying that, that these other factors aren't useful, right? If somebody is, reciprocating whatever behavior is happening, right, that's probably a pretty good indication that things are going all right, especially if they're pretty enthusiastic about it, if they, have felt really happy throughout the whole night. But we still need to remember that consent is not this, like, what is the word? It's not unchangeable. Just because it feels like we have consent based on on this checklist doesn't mean that it is automatically there, and it also doesn't mean that it's automatically not there. But it's just best to get that like quick, like, hey, are we good to do whatever, right? And it can fit right into the situation. If we're having tongues down our throat, maybe the question then is, hey, do you want to get naked, right? Like, or hey, can I take your clothes off for you, right? Those are some good ways of integrating these conversations or these questions that get at consent, that aren't maybe the idea of the mood killer or the thing that's going to completely stop everything that's occurring. It can work really well as things are happening, and it can be really nice and spicy too, right? Like, can I be the one to take off that item of clothing, or could you be the one to take off this item of clothing off of me, right? Like, there's so many ways of getting these questions in there that aren't just based off of assumptions and signs and a checklist.
Those are pretty good answers, yeah.
Thanks.
I do feel like this is the kind of attitude that usually reinforces like lesser terrible attitudes. Because like I feel like that pretty like would you think that that's like a pretty common like vibe, especially like in college environments, like how I described that?
Yeah, I think so, in the sense that like folks are most often going based off of assumptions, that they assume that they have consent.
It's like they have a
Um,
checklist, right? Like an internal checklist that they're going over rather than like talking about it.
Either an internal checklist, or they're so goal oriented on having the sexual intercourse experience that they have like tunnel vision, right? Like, that's all I'm going for. And so it can really put on or make folks not aware to other maybe signs of uncomfortability too.
That's true. I guess I don't consider the the abdication of the other person entirely. I'm still giving a lot of credit here, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably the much worse problem. But I think that the one who does think that they have the consent and is working through like a checklist when they express how they feel about it is probably going to be the one to like recruit other people into their line of thinking more often than the person who's just going to try to like actually coerce and like actively try to like debate somebody into the situation that they don't want to be in. Like I feel
Right.
like that person if like they probably know that they're bad for what they're doing. I mean, definitely some fringe cases where they think they can't do any wrong no matter what. But I'd say for the most part, those people probably know that they're doing a shitty thing and they just don't care. Whereas the Mega Alpha Chad character that I did there probably thinks that he's doing the right thing. Just probably thinks he's God's gift to the world, but at the same time also thinks that he's not doing anything wrong, thinks that he is following the steps that he's supposed to follow, which is a more dangerous ideology to have because it can spread easier. I don't see like a lot of people like trying to convince people that like it's okay if you coerce. It's okay as long as you get laid, that's all that matters. I don't ever hear that, but I do hear people being loud about the fact that I shouldn't have to ask, like I know what I'm doing kind of deal. That seems to be like the most how would I put it? It's like the most marketable like bad approach.
Yeah, I think it's just honestly really prevalent. Like, I think that that's how people, sort of regardless of gender, how people assume that relationships or that sexual moments happen, like that we can just go based off of body language, that's enough, or we can go based off of these signs and things like that. Sometimes that does lead to a positive sexual situation, but it is not the safest, if that makes sense. I think that's really like
Yeah.
the kind of main point here is that like I'm not doubting that you have had positive sexual, situations with folks using this, maybe checklist or this, markers of consent or of things being okay. What I'm trying to get at is that it is so much more accurate and so much more confirmable if we have that conversation to begin with. And then it can also open up the conversation for some boundaries too, right? So if somebody says, "Hey, I want to get naked," and the person says, "Yes, but I would love to with the lights off," right? Like I don't want to have glaring lights on every part of my body. That could only happen, or maybe can not only, but has a better opportunity to come up if we ask the question in the first place.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, that would
yeah.
be like a like conditional consent, right? Like yeah,
Yeah.
buts, which are
Sort
like
of,
equally
yeah.
valid. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Let's see. So what exactly like constitutes sexual violence? Is it purely based on how the person feels about it?
That's a really great question, and again, not one that I think I have a clean answer for. Mostly because I think that we are still in the place of understanding the different components of sexual violence. So, probably a lot of people don't think of unsolicited dick pics. Actually, no, a lot of people don't think of unsolicited dick pics as sexual violence. And even folks who receive those still may not consider it violent because there wasn't that trauma necessarily there. Sometimes
Sure.
there is, but I think a lot of people are just like, "Oh, that's so annoying." That's still violence to me, because of that bothersomeness of it, right? Like that shouldn't have happened, and therefore it's harm in that way. Even if the harm is just I'm freaking annoyed and I don't want to see another unsolicited photo again. Um, Other things I've been thinking about too, and I think we had talked about this a couple days ago or maybe yesterday about how normal it is to, yeah, we did talk about it, how normal it is to hit cis men in the genital region, like
Yeah.
whether it's like aiming at their balls or aiming at their dicks. That's so normal. And to me, that is sexual violence that we have not considered yet. Because we think like, oh, it's just funny, it's for laughs, it's hee hee ha ha. And when somebody gets in trouble for it, it's not getting in trouble for hitting that area, it's getting in trouble for being rowdy, and that's
Yeah.
about it. But like that's violent. That's literally that hurts. Like,
Yeah.
that hurts so bad. Not that I know, but like have witnessed and like have seen.
You don't have to feel like we know that it hurts just by seeing it. Like men will feel
Exactly.
phantom pain when we see other men get hit in the balls.
Exactly. It's like a very visceral response,
Yeah.
and it sucks how normalized that is.
We have a physiological response to it happening. Like our balls will retract when we see somebody else get hit in the balls. Like it's automatic.
Exactly.
That's how traumatic it is. Our bodies
is
will react
traumatic.
as though it happened to us.
But how often is that being framed as sexual violence in our society?
Like never. And I
I don't
hate it.
think
Hate
ever.
it.
Yeah, it's incredibly inappropriate, but it still happens. So I think when it comes to categorizing sexual violence, is like we're still figuring it out. And I don't. It's tough because I think it's both based on how people feel, and it's also not based on just how the people experiencing it feel. Because I would argue, if I asked almost any of the cis men that I went to high school with if they would consider that sexual violence, probably 9 out of 10 would say like, no, it was just a joke, or it's whatever. Like, I'm not. It's fine. You know, it hurt, but like it is what it is.
I don't like it, but it
still
wasn't
gonna claim
sexual.
that.
Well, the part of it too
Yeah.
is that if it's sexual violence, then maybe it was a little gay, and they probably don't like that either. So you're going to
Right.
immediately hit a roadblock there.
Exactly. Which is a whole
Yeah, a whole other can of like shitty worms.
shitty worms. yeah. Gosh, yeah.
So that's probably a decent chunk as to why we don't think about it as sexual violence too, though, because that means the straight guy doing it and now did something kind of gay. The guy who had it happen to him did something kind of gay. So like you can't entertain the idea of it being sexual until you cross that bridge first, because our brains won't let us get away with talking about, like, we can't just hop over this, especially when like cis men are like so afraid of being perceived as doing something gay. Like, I don't know, you got a stone wall, you gotta bore through it in order to get to that. But I'm 100% on board with that. I really don't want any guy touching my dick for any reason. Like, not really on board with that. Like
Right.
I'm never in a situation where I'm not attracted to men, so I'm really not gonna find a situation where like it's okay for me. I'm definitely not gonna be in a situation where I'm going to ask for that. And if I didn't ask for that, I don't care who you are. Don't fucking touch my dick. It's super duper weird.
Yep.
So yeah, it's super weird, and like I said too, like men grab pinch each other's nipples. It is the weirdest thing ever to me. Like, I don't
So
understand it at
painful.
all.
Like that I'm just like, ow. You know, like that's another one that I'm like, like I'm having a visceral response, and it's not even happening to me. But yeah, it's so normalized. And again, there may not or maybe I didn't say this earlier, but there may not be this idea of sexual intention behind it. That doesn't necessarily matter, though. It's still an area that we consider sexualized.
There's
and
something there.
That area is, it's intentionally chosen.
Yeah.
That's the part that is like connected.
Because, like,
to
why not
sexual
pinch my
violence
shoulder?
for me.
Why not my underarm fat? That shit hurt too.
Oh, that arguably hurts worse.
That's what I'm saying. And sometimes people do that too, but like, sure, do that. Let me bitch at you about that rather than fucking touching my nipples.
Right. Yep.
So yeah, that one's like super duper weird to me. Let's see. So like, what's the most rewarding part about your job?
Oh, wow. What a fun question.
Actually, you know what?
I
Before we
think-
get into it, let me make sure that I have somebody who's going to respond to somebody coming over to get the car jumped. So give me like 2 minutes. Do you have to use the bathroom or anything?
Nope, but I'll hang out.
Okay, I was going to say it'd be a totally fine time to go. Oh, smokes. So, they're here right now too, so give me 1 sec.
Oh, okay.
Hello? Okay, give me 1 minute.
Yay. Thanks.
That's awesome, buddy. I'm really glad to hear that. And there's a link in my chat for the book that she had mentioned. If you want to know more, I guess it's a really good book for that, according to her. I'm gonna listen to it on Audible. That's what the link is for, is on Audible. If you
Yeah,
care that much about it to where you want to buy the book and not like buy the audiobook, you can just Google it. I've done enough for you to get you there.
That's so funny. I will also say with that book in particular, it's also not just about like sexual violence and consent. It's also just about kind of seeing the perspective of sex from boys and guys' perspective. So it like Peggy Ornstein did some interviews with like high school boys and college men, and so it just sort of is a big overview of that. So just for more context about it.
I gotcha. And also, I don't know what the fuck your screen name is, but you know who I'm talking to. Actually, I would know. Nope. Okay, it doesn't show it. If you think it really struck a chord with you, then share the YouTube video when I have it done, which will just be like later after the stream. And also you too, if you want to share the video. I'm sure it's pretty good representation of the stuff that you think, because you put it out there.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna share it in a couple of different spots to where I make sure that people that should probably be seeing it see it.
Cool. Sounds good to me.
I know that there's like a lot of like poly groups that'll probably accelerate it a bit.
Solid.
So that's actually a pretty big like thing in the poly community. People are so like, and I'll get back to the question I asked you in a minute too, because I know you're excited to answer it. People like Facebook is a really bad place to talk about like triads, which is like one of the rarest forms of polyamory too, which isn't all that we practice, but sometimes we do. And it's totally fine and it's valid. And sometimes though it's practiced in a really, really bad way. And it's really, really manipulative, or it's really like, there's like really bad things like, I don't know how much you know about this at all. I just assume that even if you know poly people, you probably don't know a lot of people that participate in triad relationships. There's things like one penis policy is what it's called. This is really, really detrimental. So basically, like people like be in like polyamorous relationships, but like only one guy can be involved in like the polycule. Which is super duper weird. So like my entire philosophy is that I don't really feel comfortable extending my boundaries over to anybody else. Like morally, I don't feel okay telling somebody whether they can or cannot do something at all ever. And that's just generally in life. I don't mind if I'm asked for how I feel about something. I don't mind expressing how I feel about something. But if I think that it's something that might influence the decision, I always want to like caveat to like, please don't let this, like you're asking me, I didn't come to you with this information, like this is how I feel, but like I really hope that you do whatever you think is best kind of deal. I think that it's really important to like be like extremely generous with like your caveats to things like that.
I can't get John's hood open; it won't reach.
Okay, give me 1 minute. I gotta pop a hood real quick.
Okay.
And then I'll explain like why consent is like super. Basically, people think that like in triads that like there just can't be consent because one person's always like in some weird like power dynamic position to where they like literally have no say. And it does happen, but like it doesn't mean that it can't be. It's just a really narrow-minded way of thinking about things. I'll be right back.
I'll be here.
Girls, ain't nobody want to hear that.
We got some dogs on the stream.
Oh man, I'm so cold. Thank you for your patience. I am very, very cold now.
That's okay. Sorry that you're so cold.
Oh man, it is quite cold. Hello, puppy dog. So like a lot of people basically say that like consent can't be given in that kind of situation because it's inherently coercive, which I strongly disagree with. It just has to do with whether people are communicating. or not communicating, and there definitely is opportunity for bad situations to come up, but there's also opportunities for bad stuff to come up in a lot of different avenues, which don't inherently make them bad.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that.
So what's the most rewarding part of your job?
Yeah. So I think if you had asked me this at more like the beginning of my time in this position, it probably would have been a different answer. But at this point, like the most
Give me both
rewarding
answers.
okay. So initially, I think it was just being able to actively work with survivors in meaningful ways. Not that I wasn't doing that before, but it just felt great to be in a position where I could be so informative to survivors, let them know what resources there were and things like that. And then I had to learn how to navigate some of these policies and procedures and the sort of realization that many of the systems that are supposedly set up for survivors and for justice are not actually doing that at all. So over time, my more like rewarding part has been part of what I do with the peer education program is I offer internships and I supervise students. And so I absolutely love that. I love getting to see students take on projects that are so meaningful for them. And I
Sure.
love watching them grow, particularly my students who are survivors and who disclose that to me. I love watching how they take control of their own healing and use their internship work to do that. So I would say probably that, just like the growth that happens in these semesters. And even when it's not necessarily my internship students or even the students that I am working with on a weekly basis, it's also just really wonderful to see students in the presentations have those like, oh moments, or they're like, aha, yeah, like that makes sense. And I'm going to do that from here on out. Or that makes sense. And maybe I can implement some of that in my own life. Like it's just, I love those moments of like, yes, you get it, and now you will do that thing. Like it's so good.
So kind of like seeing people figure it out for themselves, because they're getting enough
Yeah,
breadcrumbs to put it together and have that like internal realization rather than just being told.
exactly, exactly. Like it just it feels really good to have understanding that comes from the person themselves as they integrate the knowledge into their own being and their own lives versus me being like, this is what you do, this is what you don't do, because it's just not that clear. I mean, we've been talking for what, like almost 2-3 hours. Like, oh whoa, it's almost 9:30. So it's just that is one, not as fun, and two, that's really not a consensual way of going about it, right? If I'm just going
Sure.
to tell you do this, don't do this, like where's the consent in that? But I love engaging in the conversation and being like, okay, like let's figure this out as a team rather than I'm the person that has all the knowledge and I'm going to force you to take this knowledge with you. Like that's just, one, is not fun, two, it's not the way that people actually learn.
Sure. Um, yeah, that's what's up. Um, I actually wasn't sure what your answer was going to be. That's a pretty good one. Not
Thanks.
that it was a right or wrong answer or anything like that. So because of the vehicle thing, I'm probably going to call it here. But definitely like to
Yeah.
talk to you again sometime in the future whenever you got free time. I had a lot
Yeah,
of
I
fun.
would love
It's always
that.
nice talking to you. And next time, if you want to give like a mini presentation or something like that on stream,
That'd be
you totally
fun.
could. And then maybe after we can just have like more like casual conversation. I'd really like
Yeah.
to. I'd really like to talk to you about just like outside of like your professional scope, just like talk to you about like your like your like normative like ethic claims and stuff like that, because I know you have a good head on your shoulders and you're studying psychology. I think it'd be really interesting to see how that shapes like your like I mean, a little bit on like your axiomatic like ideologies of like moral principles, but then like just like some of like the more normative claims that you have and some like your ought statements and things like that seem to be pretty interesting to me, because like pretty much everything you do is steeped in morality. So it'd just be really interesting to see how that like ends up shaping out in like an actual like moral ethical conversation.
Yeah, I would absolutely love that. I'd love to come back. I'd love to do a workshop. Whatever works best for you works for me. Except for the fact that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, so I'm doing 80 million things, so it probably won't be until a little bit, but I would love to over the summer and everything like that. So yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was really
Yeah,
fun.
absolutely. I'll send you a link to the YouTube video when it's up, and just share the heck out of it so people can hear this stuff.
Awesome. Thank you. I definitely will. Have a great night.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
All right.